So a lot of the design and structure of these surveys is based on some of the guidelines, professional guidelines from IDAHO4, which is the American Association of Public Opinion Research, and the ASTC, which is the American Society of Trial Consultants, and also 40 years of people doing this. So the way it works is we introduced to the survey. There's an introduction actually at the beginning, even before they answer a question, or they're told why they're being called. We're calling to get their opinions about an upcoming trial, and that their opinions are important because they were selected as a representative, household or whatever in the community. And then after they go through that screening process, they're instructed that there's no right or wrong answers to any of the questions. They can always report that they have no opinion or they don't know, and everything will remain anonymous. So the first few questions try to measure just basic criminal justice attitudes to get them familiar with the process, familiar with the survey, answering questions. And then they're introduced to the actual case, the case recognition question. And then if they know about the case, they continue and are asked prejudgment questions, open-ended questions to assess some key opinions, then case knowledge questions, which are recognition questions. And then they go into the demographic section, which is how they consume media. And yeah.
You mentioned two organizations, and I think earlier you mentioned that you were regularly a member of those organizations. Do they help set standards for how surveys should take place?
They did.
And tell me a little bit more about the introduction. Why do you do that?
The first introduction or the instruction after that? They get through the screener.
The introduction and then the instruction.
Yeah, well, you're trying to encourage people to participate to increase response rates, right? So you're told, again, why you're calling. It's not a sales call. We're calling to get the opinions of people in your community and why. So it's not just random, so they understand it's about an upcoming trial. We don't tell them what trial because that would clearly lead to potential response bias. And they're encouraged to continue participating because they represent their community. They were selected randomly. And then there's efforts to increase response rates we do callbacks. So everybody, each number is called up to 3 times at different times of the day. So if somebody maybe is at work, you still have a chance of being included in the survey. There's soft conversion techniques. So if somebody's kind of on the fence, like maybe they're like, maybe I'm busy, can you call me back? We try to find out when can we call you back so we can talk to them later, just to encourage them to participate and not drop off. So all of that stuff is done to increase response rates as best we can. And that's all starts with the introduction. And then the follow-up introduction or instruction kind of is similar. It explains there's no right or wrong answers. They're not forced to say yes or no. They can say no opinion, I don't know. They can refuse to answer the question, all of those things.
Can they answer some questions and not others if that's what they want to do?
Absolutely. That's called a refusal. So they might say, I don't feel comfortable answering that question, or I'm not going to answer that.
All right. So you did a community attitude survey in this case. Did you only look at Lake County?
No.
What counties did you look at?
So we looked at 4 different counties overall. So we looked at Ada County, Bannock County, Canyon County, and Lake County.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about the 3 comparative counties. But for now, can you walk us through your high-level findings for Lake County and Ada County?
Sure. So I think high level, you can see case recognition is very high. And it's also high in Ada County. It's 93% there. It's almost everyone in Lake County, 98%, which is similar to what I saw in the George Floyd case, where it was 99%. So this is extremely high. They're pretty much the same. And it's not just a passive familiarity with the case. It's not that they recognize it but don't know much. You can see people in Latah County reported that they followed the case somewhat or very closely. Almost 70% are closely following this case. And again, that means they're actively looking for information, passively consuming information, talking about it. So it's a big deal in this community. And there's a presumption of guilt. The burden has shifted. So 67% believe BRYAN Kohberger is guilty of murder, and 25% reported that he's definitely guilty. So these are strong opinions. And 51% reported what I call a fixed opinion, where they reported that Kohberger would have a difficult time convincing them that he's not guilty. So the burden of proof is shifted on the defendant to prove his innocence. And that's undermines due process. That's not how our system is designed to work. And also on the question of sentence, you can see that 52% believe that he should be sentenced to death.
When I look at this slide and I look at the prejudgment, I'm guilty of murder, and am I using that term right? Prejudgment means somebody's decided before we ever get anywhere near trial that Mr. Kohberger is guilty of murder. When I look at those numbers, it's higher in Ada County. And it's not a secret to anybody in this room that our argument is to move this case to Ada County. Does this seem counterintuitive when I look at the prejudgment rate and it's higher percentage-wise in Ada County?
Yeah, so first of all, in my mind, it's two questions. One is, should the case be moved? Not where, it's should the case be moved? Has presumption of innocence been undermined based on the reasonable likelihood standard, which is less than the preponderance of the evidence? So second question is where? In a case like this, you're going to see high case recognition and high prejudgment everywhere. They're essentially the same in terms of 67%, 68%. But when you look at case recognition and size, population size, you'll find that in Ada County, there's about 16 times more people in that county that have not prejudged, if you do the math. So yes, those numbers look the same for those who recognize the case, but there's a much larger swath of people who haven't prejudged. And it's not just prejudgment that matters. So that's one variable you look at, but it's not just that. There's a host of other things. Extent of case knowledge, connections to the case, been exposed to rumors. There's all these other factors that play in. It's not just one item, it's the totality of the findings, not just one question.
When I move to the other slide, what am I seeing on this slide?
So these are instances just to show how invested people in this community are. So almost 80%, 79% have talked about this case online or in person. And that's where information is spread. So even those who may not closely follow the news are learning about it from their neighbors, from their coworkers, from family, from social media, and all of that. So information is being spread through those channels as well. And you do see big differences there when you're looking at Ada County. It's much lower because they're less invested in this case. It wasn't a shocking incident that occurred in their own community. You see that 32% have watched a show, for example, that Netflix or Paramount show or Dateline or something about the case. Almost 40%, 39% personally experienced high levels of stress, anxiety, or fear during the search for the killer while they were here. So that's very high. And then 45% know someone else who has. And if you look at those together, it's actually about 63% have either personally experienced fear or know someone who has during that search. And that shows like the impact it had on them. And you'll see it later in some of the opens where people talk about, I was scared to walk outside. They're running to their car from work because they don't feel safe. They can see the house from their office. One person mentions that their wife was scared to go to the supermarket. People talk about they locked their doors for the first time. So it just shows the personal fear and impact this case created in this community that you do not see in large communities.
I have a follow-up question for you on this slide. The statistics that you show us show that the incident of looking at things on social media and Netflix and regular primetime news shows is higher in Latah County. And that correlates to the sampling of things you showed us a few moments ago, just your sample of what's out there on social media, on Netflix, and that sort of thing. Is that right? It's higher in Latah County?
It is higher in Latah County. Now, when you say correlates, like I didn't do a statistical analysis, I would say that's the stuff, the content out there. That's what it looks like if you just do a search and you're following it. And on the anxiety question, that number for Ada County is about 32%. So it's much lower.
Looking at this slide, what does it mean with these differences we're seeing in numbers?
Well, to me, again, it shows personal connection, the personal experience. In a big county, there might be a sensational crime, but you don't see people feeling that way. Because crime is unfortunately frequent, and there might be something else that captures their attention, or there's so much going on. It's not shocking. Here, this is something when people talk about, again, there's an idyllic community where everyone felt safe, and this person took it away from us. It was like shattering this sense of security and safety that we had. And everybody experienced it. And my guess is a lot of people can probably reflect on where they were when they learned this and how it impacted them personally. So it's very unique.
What are we looking at on this slide?
I think you skipped a slide. Yeah.
Okay.
Is this one that starts with lived or know someone who would?
Yes.
Okay. So again, this comes back to personal connections. So 78% of survey respondents either lived or know someone who lived in Moscow when the murders occurred, compared to 20% in Ada County. And that's not surprising, because if you look at the size of Latah County, it's about 32,500 people over the age of 18, compared to about 406,000 in Ada County. And I think it's like 66% of Latah County is in Moscow, so it's a huge percentage. So it's not shocking that people were here or know somebody who was here when it occurred. And a large number of people are students or employees at the university. It's a quarter of the sample. I ran across one citation where it was like 36%, so it's even higher, much lower in Ada County. And you can see 40% of people have visited a home or walked by it where this crime occurred. And again, if you look at some of the opens, somebody talks about seeing the house from their office window. So it's a constant reminder of this awful thing that happened. These are things, again, that jurors coming into that courtroom will see. It's like, you know, indicators in the community of what impacted them. People may be fearful of, you know, people know they're on the jury and all those things because it's such a small community and people are so invested. And you can see that 22% of the respondents actually work or know someone who worked for a law enforcement agency involved in the investigation. 22% compared to just 4% in Ada County. So again, direct connections to this case.
And those direct connections, those are things that Latah County juror would bring in. Is that right?
Yes, and that's where we see these big differences in national cases like this. This is typically what you see when the entire state is saturated with coverage. Everybody's going to know about it and have opinions to some degree, but it doesn't necessarily have personal connection. That's why cases like the Oklahoma City bombing case was moved. I mean, that was a national case. Everybody knew about it, but they still moved it because of the personal connections.
Now advance to the slide. What are we seeing on this slide?
Well, this goes back to case knowledge. So we talked earlier in the day about how case knowledge and impacts prejudgment and how we have this belief perseverance. So people develop these more complex schema and case knowledge. They're more resistant to change. And you can see almost 80% of people in Latah County were familiar with at least 5 of the 9 media items we tested in the survey, almost 80%, and 52% knew 7 out of the 9, or at least 7 of those items. So they have a lot of case knowledge here. It's quite high.
While we're here, I'm talking about the media items. Did you test on every media item you could find?
No.
Did you have to select a certain number so that you could do the survey?
What I do is I read all of the media coverage that is local, those local newspapers, and I'm pulling items that stand out, that are repeated quite a bit. So there's like multiple references to certain things and things that are inadmissible, prejudicial, things that are likely to create bias and have an impact.
All right. I want to talk a little bit more about how you set up the survey. What are we seeing?
So this should kind of give you an indication of the flow of the survey. So this is what I call the case recognition question. And it's developed by reading a lot of the coverage and seeing how the case is commonly described in the language in the newspaper, on TV, to construct a case recognition item to try to trigger a memory. So if someone answers yes to this question, question 2A, they then go to the prejudgment question. If somebody answers no, we give them a little more information to see if that triggers a memory. If that does trigger a memory, then they go to the prejudgment question. And if not, they go to the demographic question. So we always have 2 case recognition questions. That's the recommendation, again, in the ASDC professional guidelines. We usually pick up 1 to 2% when we do that in most surveys.
Does this question come after your earlier questions to get them to take your survey, the introduction and information questions?
Yes, it's actually even deeper. So you get the introduction. First, you get why we're calling, and then you go through screener questions, and then you're given an instruction about you. There's no right or wrong answers. You can always say, I don't know. I can always refuse. Your answers are anonymous. Then they answer, I think, 3 or 4 general criminal justice questions, and then they get to this question.
When you say the prejudgment question, are you talking about the media items stuff? Is that the same thing you're talking about?
Prejudgment is whether or not you believe a defendant's guilty of whatever the crime is. This is before any of the media items. You would never put those media items and then ask if you think they're guilty, because then you'll create response effects. Like maybe they didn't know that item and you just gave them prejudicial information, and now I think he's guilty because you just told me he confessed, or whatever thing it is. Like, you wouldn't want to do that.
Is that why the survey's designed that way?
Yes.
All right, let's talk about some of the survey results. Walk us through what we're seeing here.
Okay, so again, the data suggests that this case has captured the community's attention. This is not a case where people have moved on. Almost everyone in the community recognizes this case. You're at 98% recognition rate. And it's not just a passing familiarity. People are closely following the case. 29% are following it very closely. 39% are following it somewhat closely. So you're basically at 60% closely following this case, which is quite high.
All right, what are we seeing on this slide?
So this is one of the ways we test the validity of our survey. So we talked again, when we talk about the research, we know that people who closely follow a case, people who have a lot of case knowledge, are more likely to believe a defendant is guilty. So one of the things we would expect is to find a similar relationship in our survey, which indicates validity. So, and that's what we find. So whether or not people are closely following this case is significantly related to bias. So if people are following it very closely, within that group, the guilt rate is 84%, and somewhat closely it's 73%. Just kind of looking at it combined, you're at basically 77% of people who are following it somewhat or very closely believe the defendant is guilty of murder. So the more you follow it, the more likely you're to be exposed to prejudicial content, the more likely you are to develop a complex memory and case knowledge, and more likely to have an opinion.
All right, what did you learn about prospective jurors who are talking to each other?
So one is the fact they are talking to each other, and we don't always see that. Sometimes that's 40%, 50%, or even less in terms of talking about a specific case. And you can see here, it's almost everyone. 88% of people who know about the case have talked about it either in person or online. That's quite high, and they're following it, seeing things on social media. They're watching, Netflix episodes or Paramount or whatever it was on. They're seeing shows. They're seeing it in their news feeds. They're closely talking about it. In a small community, that's how information gets spread. It's what we call this informal communication network.
Did you have an opportunity in your survey to learn more about different rumors and things that are going around in Utah County?
I did. So we asked an open-ended question after the prejudgment question, and then it should be what they know about the case and their opinion. And we asked what rumors or theories they've heard in the community to see if they're regurgitating some of the stuff that's been in the newspaper, on social media, the idea, again, of informal communication networks. In smaller communities, you tend to get a lot of like, well, I knew somebody who knew this person, or personal connections, and information gets spread that way. And that's what we saw here. There's a lot of references to things that, the defendant committed a murder in Oregon. Like speculation, no evidence of that. It's just something they heard. That he talked about committing the perfect murder on a paper, or that he hates women and he had trouble at the university he goes to with women, and people who worked with him had problems. He stalked her because she didn't respond to him. People were looking at Reddit comments or Reddit posts he had made and from years back, all that kind of stuff. And then references to him, having obsession with some of the victims, ritual animal killings. And these are just a couple examples. Like you'll see that stuff everywhere, but the amount you see in Latah County is much higher. Like, if you go through comments in Ada County, you'll find some too. You can find examples, and I'm sure if you go to Bannock and Canyon, you're going to see them because the case has gotten so much attention, but not to the degree you have here. And given the size of the community, it's much more significant.
Did you record and document all of these comments in the actual survey report?
Yes.
Okay, and that's something that we provided to the court, and the state has no objection, so the court can read the full scope of the rumors from Latah County residents on his own time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Some fun light reading.
All right. What did you learn about Latah County residents that were related to Moscow, specific Moscow connections?
Well, this is kind of the unique nature of this too, that I see in cases like natural disasters, like wildfires is a good example where it's this like collective trauma everybody goes through. So you can see 76% of residents here lived or knew someone who lived in Moscow at the time of the murders. So they either are here, the loved one is here, and it creates anxiety, right? So I think it was like almost 40% of students left during Thanksgiving, didn't come back because they were scared for their safety. And you see that in the other questions. So asking about if people experience stress, anxiety, or fear during that search, and you can see 39% reported that they personally did, and another 45% reported that someone they know. And if you look at those, it's called a crosstab. And the question is, did you or someone you know? It jumps up to 63%. So a large percentage of people were anxious and scared about their own personal safety or the safety of someone they know and care about.
Tell me about the open question about people's sense of security. Did people respond to that?
So one of the questions we ask is, how did this crime impact your community? And if I do this in a big county and I ask this, or big venue, federal case, you get a lot of, it didn't, or not much, or, I didn't live near it, so not me, or something like that. You get a lot of that. And I'm sure there's some of that here too. If you look at different venues, Ada County probably has a lot of that, and Bannock. What really stood out to me was this shattering our sense of innocence, right? This is an innocent town and no crimes or horrible things ever happened here. And this guy took it away from us. We had this idyllic, safe community, and this person destroyed it. This crime destroyed it. And they talk about people, they never locked their cars before, their homes. I think one person said, like, he didn't even have a house to his key when he bought it, or a key to his house. That makes more sense. And suddenly people are locking doors because they're fearful. People are scared to go to their cars. Again, someone mentioned, like, you could see the house from their office, and students and staff would run to their car to be safe. People's partners were scared to go to the grocery store. And there were tons of comments about that. This idea that we have this safe community and it's never going to be the same. It's lost. It's like our sense of safety and security, this special place, this tiny little place that's a bubble from all the bad stuff in the world. And then this thing happened.
The comments that you depicted in this slide, is that all of them, or are there others for the court to take a look at?
There's plenty. On top of reading the other stuff, feel free to read all those opens.
Okay. What about the connection to the house where this happened? What did we learn?
Well, I think it's comes to, like, again, this like direct and indirect connections to this case, which makes it unique in Latah County, which you don't see everywhere. Is 40% of residents who know about the case, which is pretty much everyone, have either visited the home where the crime occurred or walked by. And so there is this constant reminder of this awful thing in their daily lives. And also you see a large percentage of people are students or employees at the university, or connected to it. the investigation itself. 22% were connected to the criminal investigation. And then 25% were either students or employees of the university. And we know, if you look at it, like the university is a big employer in this community. And when all of these students leave, it has an impact on the economy. Over 60% of the county is made up of people who live in Moscow. And if you look at some of the data, it indicates about 36% of people in this county are either students or employees at the university. So even higher than we saw in the survey.
All right. I want to talk about the prejudgment question. What did you learn?
So this question is one of the indicators of undermining the presumption of innocence. So I look at it, I'm always looking, when I think about due process, is the presumption of innocence. And you see when it shifts to a presumption of guilt. So in this case, 67% of prospective jurors who recognize the case believe Bryan Kohberger is guilty of murder, and 25% have a strong opinion on that. So if you think about it, given the high recognition rate here, if 100 jurors walked into this room during voir dire, 66% of them already think he's guilty before they've heard any evidence.
And that's just the prejudgment question. That's not talking about the other factors that you talked about, media awareness, case connection to the community, things like that.
No, that's just looking at everyone. And if you start looking at things like, well, do they know a lot of detail? That prejudgment jumps up to over 80%. Do they closely follow it? Jumps up to 70%, whatever it is. So that's just looking at the entire sample. Start looking at other things, that prejudgment gets even higher.
You've talked about what you've defined as a fixed opinion or a fixed presumption of guilt. What did you find about that?
Yes, so the question I ask is basically based off, I'm going to start talking selective now. Based off of what you've read, seen, or heard, would the defendant have a difficult time convincing you that he's not guilty? So burden of proof shifting on the defendant. I think I mentioned this last time, but that question was developed by a judge in Tennessee. And what you were seeing was they would ask jurors, what do you know about the case? And they would tell them some information or minimize what they know. And then the question was, do you think he's guilty? And maybe they'd say yes. And then they'd say, but I can be fair and impartial. I can set it aside. I think I can do it. And then the follow-up was, well, would he have a difficult time convincing you that he's not guilty? And oh yeah, I can't change my mind. So it's just much more effective. I find it's more likely to be correlated with these other indicators of bias. So it seems to be more of a valid question. And when I did it, you see basically 51% indicated a strong opinion that would shift the burden of proof onto the defendant. And again, if you look at our analysis of 100 jurors walking in, that would be 50 out of 100 would fall into that category.
They can't change their mind.
Well, I'm sure you can get them to say they can be fair because I see it all the time. But this doesn't mean they can't. We heard a lot about that earlier today. Yeah.
All right. And did you ask similar questions, prejudgment for guilt, I guess prejudgment for the sentence?
Yes. So because this is a capital case, I did ask whether or not which sentence do they believe the jury should select if he's convicted. And you can see 52% reported that he should get the death penalty based off of what they've read, seen, or heard, whereas just 23.5 or 24% reported that he should get life.
Did you ask a fixed question about the penalty?
Yes, so I asked the same fixed opinion question, and you find that 51% believe that the sentence should be death and that he couldn't convince them that it should be life. Only 19% reported that the defendant would not have a difficult time convincing them that he should get a life sentence.
This is a small community. What did you learn about the impact of this case on this small community and the pressure of a juror in Utah County to convict?
So one of the things I wanted to look at, because it's a small community and people know everyone, and the pressure when coming in and out of this courthouse on a day-to-day basis, when it's been inundated with journalists, and my guess is people can figure out who's on the jury by who's not picking their kids up at school and talking to neighbors and all that, is there pressure? Do the jurors ever feel pressure like there has to be a certain outcome? How would the community react if he's not convicted, if he's found not guilty? And there was quite a bit of strong comments and a range of themes from people would basically kill him, to they burn the courthouse down, or assume that the jury failed, or that he would have to prove that he was not guilty. Again, shifting the burden. So it's like, I can't imagine that happening because they have so much evidence against him. We would be dumbfounded. Like, how could he not be guilty given the amount of evidence? Several would be on the hunt for him to make sure he gets what's coming to him. And then just emotional stuff about it would be devastating to the community. Other people talked about the fear if he didn't do it, well, who did? Like, that means this person's still among us, who creates the same stress and fear and anxiety that people had before. So this community needs closure. And you have to imagine what that's like for a jury for months on end, in and out of this courtroom in this tiny community and trying to explain to their neighbors, what they did and why. And that shifts the burden again back onto the defendants.
The comments that you've captured in this PowerPoint slide, is this all?
Yeah, these are just a few examples.
Plenty more for the court to read?
Yeah.
Did you ask these open questions in the comparative counties too?
Yes, it's the same question as in all the counties.
Were the other counties as high of rate in these kinds of answers? Did they have a similar kind of answer as Latah County potential jurors did?
No. And now you can read through it and you will find answers that people would be angry and upset because you're talking to hundreds of people and you're going to get those. But they're much less strong. They're much more, no opinion. They wouldn't have an impact, things like that you see in other places. Very few people in Latah County have that.
All right. I think we have a couple of slides on the questions that were in the survey. I think we know those.
Yes. So these are our case recognition questions, we call them, or I call them recognition items, I guess. So we do ask an open-ended question. What have you read, seen, or heard about the case? We'll get into that, but that's the typical question you ask in jury selection. And people answer that, but they often use minimization language or unable to recall everything. So we ask later on these case recognition items to see if they're familiar with widely reported media items. And if you look at the professional guidelines, this is what's recommended. So we first ask an open-ended question, and then later you follow up with these closed-ended questions.
What did you learn when you did that in this survey with Latah?
So I'm not going to go through all of them, but we learned that people are familiar with many items that have been widely reported in the media. And you don't always see that. Sometimes case recognition is high, but people don't know a lot of detail. Maybe they know a few items or recognition rates are 40, 50%. But what we found here are people have well-developed attitudes and opinions and have been recall a lot of prejudicial content. So in Latah County, you can see that 79% were familiar with at least 5 of the 9 media items, and 52% knew 7 or more of the media items that we tested, over half.
And you tested on 9, is that right? 9.
Yeah, it's 9.
And I think you mentioned, but I think your chart's going to explain to me why more media items, more media recognition items correlate with the prejudgment question of guilt.
Yeah, and this goes back to validity of the survey, right? We know from earlier research that case knowledge is correlated with prejudgment, and that's exactly what we found. So the more people know, the more case knowledge, the stronger their opinions, the more likely they are to have developed a perception of guilt. So people who are familiar with 5 or 6 items, you can see it's 66% guilt rate, and for 7, it's 82%. So jumps up quite a bit. So the more case knowledge you have, the more likely you are to believe guilty. And you see the same thing with that, I call it that fixed opinion question. That's significantly related to case knowledge as well. So the number of people who said that he would have a difficult time changing their mind is essentially 66%. If they know 7 or more items.
Let's talk about the specific items that were known, just a few of them. We won't go through all of them. What did you learn?
So these are just going through a few that we tested, and you can see high recognition rates and significantly related to prejudgment. So whether or not people know that a knife sheath was found on the bed next to one of the victims, 81% of survey respondents in Latah County knew that detail. And you can see it's significantly related to bias. So if you knew that, 72% of people who knew that item believe he's guilty, and 55% reported that he would have a difficult time convincing them otherwise.
What about another media item?
What about what?
Another media item?
So the next one is whether or not they knew that DNA was found on the knife sheath, that there was a match for the defendant. And you can see that 67% know that detail. And if you know it, it's highly prejudicial. So 75% of people who know that item believe that he's guilty, and 60% reported a fixed opinion.
How about a vehicle recording?
So this one, whether or not Brian Kohberger owns the same type of car recorded on the video driving in the neighborhood where the killings occurred. This was a widely reported media item. So 86% of people know that detail, and 82% of those who do know that believe he's guilty. Quite high.
How about the cell phone tower media item?
So on that one, you see a case recognition rate of, or item recognition rate of 79%. 79% of survey respondents knew that detail. And if you knew that, 72% of them believe that the defendant's guilty.
How about the media item studies?
So this would go down to like a misinformation, I'll call it an inaccurate detail that was widely reported, that the defendant had stalked one of the victims. And you can see recognition rate currently at 45% when the survey was done. And 81% of people who knew that detail reported that he's guilty.
How about following on social media?
I believe this is the last one. You can see whether or not he was essentially following them on social media. 45% recognition rate, and 79% of those who know that believe he's guilty. And these are all statistically significant findings.
Let's talk about some of the comparative counties that you surveyed, and if you can give me a high level of your key findings in those counties.
Sure. So now, in my mind, this shows significant bias, that there's a reasonable likelihood that the due process has been undermined in the sense that there's a presumption of guilt in this county. And the question is, if you were to move it, is there like, where would you move it? That's question 2.
We're on to the second part.
We're on to the second part now. That's where this comes. So you'll see recognition rates are high in these 3 counties we tested. So we tested Ada County because it's the biggest county in the state. It's about 406,000 people over the age of 18, and other high-profile cases have been moved there before and recently. Canyon County we picked because I believe it's the second largest county, and it is also near Ada County. So it's a big county. We picked that, and we picked Bannock County because it's just far away. And it had less media coverage. So we wanted to see if there was a possibility that people would have less case knowledge there. And you can see recognition rates vary from 90% to, from 84% to 93% across those 3 cases. And you can see that in terms of how closely they followed it is less than we saw in Latah County. So Ada is 58, Canyon is 51, and Bannock is 46. Compared to Latah County, remember, it was 68%, much higher. The guilt rates are essentially the same, or it's a little higher in Bannock County. But because of the population size, there's a big difference. So again, you'll find about 16 times more people in Ada County who have not prejudged compared to here. And then similar in terms of the strength of opinion and difficulty in convincing them that he's not guilty, similar to what you see here. And sentence similar as well. So you're in the 49 to 57%. So these numbers are also high.
Where do you start to see differences that matter?
You start to see differences when you talk about personal connection. That's where the big differences come up. So remember we said that 79% of people in Ada County had talked about this case. Might be wrong, might have been higher. It's just 60% in Ada County, 50% in Canyon, and 51% in Bannock. So it's much lower. You'll see whether or not they've experienced high levels of stress. In Ada County, it's just 17%. and the other two counties, it's only 11%. It was 39% in the county here. And then whether or not they know someone who experienced higher levels of stress, we had 45% here. Here we're down to 24, 19, and 19. So you see big differences there in terms of the community connection, the personal connection. Their case.
What about the connections to Moscow that are unique to this area?
Yes, so just 20% in Ada County know someone who lived in Moscow. 15% in Canyon and 16% in Bannock, 78% in Latah County. Whether or not they were a student or employee in Latah County, that was 25%, and we're looking at 4% and 3%, much lower. Whether they visited the home or saw it, Latah County is 40%. Here we're down to 8%, 3%, 2%, much lower. Whether or not they knew someone who actually was involved in the investigation, in Latah County, that number was 22%, I believe. And in Ada County, it's just 4, Canyon it's 2, Bannock it's 2. So much lower when it comes to those type of connections, the personal connection, personal investment in the case.
What about the recognition of media items?
Yeah, so we had, I think it was 79% in Latah County knew at least 5 of those media items, and it drops to 65% in Ada, 52% in Canyon, 59% in Bannock. If they knew 7 or more, that was 52% in Latah County. It's just 42% in Ada, 27% in Canyon, and 29% in Bannock. So less case knowledge. And we know case knowledge comes back to belief perseverance, right? So the more you know, the more resistant your attitudes are to change, the more likely you are to attend to and process information consistent with what we know. New information about the DNA evidence, I already know about that. That's credible, I give that weight. So you're much more likely to see that in Latah County.
All right. I think you told us a little bit about the population size. And is that why you selected Ada was the population size?
So I'm not selecting anything. I'm just pointing out some possibilities. So I selected Ada County in terms of to do the survey because it's the largest county in the state. And, you know, it was a Yollie case was moved there. So you know that they can take this case in. We know large counties, it's less of a big deal when the case moves there. It doesn't become the biggest story in that community. So I wanted to test Latah County. Pick Canyon because it's the second largest county, over 184,000 people. And then I picked Bannock because it's further away. It's quite far away, hundreds of miles from here, and it's in a different media zone. It does have some of the similarities of Latah County. So for example, there's a university there that's the second largest employer. So there's a risk there. About 18% of the population is connected to that university. So there are those risks. And I think the problem there, while some of the numbers are good, are it'll become a huge deal if that case is moved there. You're gonna have the media circus move from here to there, and it's gonna become, again, a huge story in that community. So there is risk if you choose a smaller venue that something like that will happen.
And that risk is tied specifically to the size of Bannock County?
Yes, smaller counties, you don't have stories like this regularly happening. So it's more likely to become a big deal in that county. And you could end up with significant bias between the time the case is moved and the time it goes to trial, because there might be an increase in media coverage there.
When we talk about the survey itself, was it only people who knew about the case that took the survey?
No. That explain to me what you mean by that.
Well, I'm looking at your slide here about people who, whether or not they know about the case, do they finish the survey? I think one of the things the state's criticized about is a non-response bias. So I want to understand if you can tell us that
Sure.
about how the survey works, this one and others.
Right. So first of all, one thing we do is we do comparison surveys in a host of different cases. So if you look at other cases we've done this on, if that were true, you would find that only people who know about the case take the survey in the comparison county as well, right? So you can see in Renfro, this was an Idaho case, in Kootenai County, 89% of survey respondents recognized the case that took the survey, that completed it. In Ada County, 67% of the people that completed the survey did not know about the case. So you would expect to have, you wouldn't see that trend if people just say, oh, I don't know about this, I'm not going to take the survey, I have no opinion. In state of Tennessee, v. Andrew Delkey, similar findings. So in Davidson County, 67% of the people who completed the survey knew about the case. In Hamilton County, 84% of people who completed the survey did not know anything about the case. In United States, v. James Cloud, which was in Washington, you can look at, we did 3 venues, and in Yakima, 55% of the people that completed the survey knew about the case. In Richland, 82% did not know about the case. In Spokane, 90% did not know about the case. What's unique and why you see high recognition rates across the surveys here is because it's a national case. And when we have national cases, you see high recognition rates all over. So this last one, the state of Minnesota, the Alexander King, was the George Floyd case. And you can see high recognition rates in all the counties, just like we see here. The reason is because there's a lot of media exposure everywhere. But it's not that people are hanging up because they don't want to take the survey. In fact, if you look at the call data, after they were told the case recognition question and described the case, only one person hung up out of the 1,200 people that completed the survey. We had one person who terminated the survey after being told what the survey was about. Everyone else.
All 4 counties?
All 4 counties, one person.
All right. We have talked quite a bit about the bias and the prejudicial media coverage and the difficulty, the impossibility that will have in seating a jury in Latah County. I want to talk a little bit about jury selection in cases that have a lot of publicity. Are you familiar with that?
Sure, yes.
All right. Why should we talk about this now? Why do we not want to just wait and try to pick a jury first?
Well, I think first of all, I've done a lot of jury selections. I'm sure you have, Your Honor, you have, I'm sure you all have. So we all know how the jury selection process works. So in a normal case, people do not have case-specific attitudes. And we know specific attitudes are predictive of behavior. So I might just have a general passing attitude towards something. I mentioned DUI, or it's like a contract dispute. Like, you can ask me questions. I don't have strong opinions. I don't know anything about the case. So they're not specific attitudes. So jury selection is effective in that scenario. It's fine. But when people have case-specific attitudes and case-specific knowledge, and I've heard information and evidence, even if it's coming into trial, I've heard it in the context of a news story. There's no rules of evidence that were applied. There was no cross-examination. There was no counter expert to refute what was said. It was just said by a public, speaker who was on an editorial on a television station, on Nancy Grace. So it's very different. And then when I hear it as evidence, it's just confirming what I already know. It's not new, not processing it for the first time. So that's one of the big problems. So why you need to identify people that have that content and information. And there's challenges because of the way memory works. Recall is limited, and we'll get to that. But when you ask people, what do you know about the case? They are not able to give a full account of everything they know. So it's very hard to assess what people know, which makes it very difficult to exercise cause challenges and predicate challenges. And the other thing is just the nature of jury selection. It's very easy to rehabilitate a juror to get them to say they can be fair. It happens all the time. So a juror says that I had this experience, or I think I'm leaning towards one side, and it's so easy. We do it all the time to get a socially desirable response. You start with, well, the law requires everyone to be fair. Everybody has their own opinions, and that's okay. We're just asking you, can you follow the law? Can you follow the instructions? Can you deliberate? Can you be fair? And most people will say yes to that because they want to create a socially desirable response. They know what the right answer is. Give leading questions. In one study, they actually analyzed a transcript, or 3 trials transcripts, and it was like 60% of the comments during voir dire were from attorneys and judges. Just 40% were from jurors, and 63% of the comments from jurors were one-word answers. And I see that in the post-conviction stuff I do when I analyze transcripts. It's 3 pages of indoctrination into what a juror is supposed to do, ending with a closed-ended answer, can you set it aside? That's not an indicator of what their ability to do. People can't just men in black flash heaping themselves and forget everything. It doesn't work that way.
I think we may have covered Fort Dyer and honest disclosure with that, and I didn't advance the slide. Can you give us a case example or an example of this?
Sure. So this is an example of a stealth juror. So a case like this, you're a stealth juror, there's a likelihood that people want to be on this case, right? It's a high profile case. It's going to be on TV. You're going to get a lot of attention. There might be a desire to seek justice and you want to be involved in that. Well, how do you identify jurors like that? So this is an example case I worked on where it was a long time ago. It's in LA. There was this division in the police department called the Rampart Division, Rampart. And basically there were a number of corrupt police officers who were stealing drugs out of the evidence locker, shooting suspects and planting guns on them. It was these rogue police officers. And one of the people, his last name was Ovando, he had been shot by a police officer, this guy Perez, who then planted a gun on him and alleged that Ovando had shot at him. So he was convicted of attempted murder. He was paralyzed from the waist down. And then Perez got caught stealing drugs out of the locker room. So he confessed to all these things and Ovando was released. He got like a $20 million settlement against LA County. Then he sued the public defender, claiming that, they should have figured this whole thing out and known that, there was a scandal and so on. And it won like $6 million in that case. And then later when they looked, it turned out that one of the jurors on that case had been in a movie about the incident called Gang Wars. And when they were asked, has anybody have a connection to the case? She didn't raise her hand. But during the deliberations, she talked about stuff she knew. She talked about stuff that didn't come into trial, and it resulted in a mistrial. So that's just one example. There's other examples as well. But yeah, so that's one challenge you have in a case like that.
All right, recall and recognition. I think you're going to talk to us about how hard it is to ferret out what somebody knows.
So to me, this is one of the biggest challenges in high profile cases. So the question you ask on the juror questionnaire and open voir dire is, what have you read, seen, or heard about this case? That's the open-ended question you ask. That is what we call a recall question. And the cognitive task is, on the spot, I need to search my memory and see what's accessible and salient and what I can remember on the spot. And I'll tell you. And that's and then you usually followed up with, can you be fair and impartial? And what we find is people are not able to recall everything they know. And that information that they forgot to mention comes up later. So the common example is, tell me everything you know about a movie. I'm going to go with Star Wars. And you probably will tell me a lot because a lot of people have seen that movie or seen it a bunch of times. But if I asked you follow-up closed-ended questions, you'd find that you forgot to mention a whole bunch of things. Like maybe you didn't mention that Luke Skywalker was Darth Vader's son, right? And it was, do you remember that? Oh, of course I know that. I just forgot to mention it. So you see things like that. So the tricky thing is you can't ask people, have you read, seen, or heard if the defendant was stalking one of the victims? Because now you're poisoning the well. What if they didn't mention that and they're open-ended? Doesn't mean they don't know it, because we know about 45% of the population here does know it. So you're in that position where you are trying to make an assessment if this juror can truly be fair and impartial without knowing what this juror actually knows about the case. And that's one of the biggest problems you have in high-profile cases that are not a problem in your run-of-the-mill typical case.
Have you seen that bear itself out in a real case?
I have. This was a case in Texas where we actually had community members come in during the venue hearing and treated them like mock jurors in a sense and asked them what they knew about the case. And they told us. It was a big case at the time in Hidalgo County in Texas. And people told us what they knew. And then we asked, is that everything you know? And they'd say, yes, that's it. And because it's not real jury selection, we had the opportunity to demonstrate this whole problem. And we would say things like, well, did you know that he allegedly confessed? And then it would stimulate a memory and the person would say, oh yeah, I did know that. He actually confessed twice at a monastery. So it triggered a memory. And then it was, well, is that everything else you know? Do you know anything else? And they say, no, that's it. And say, well, did you ever hear that he had committed another crime? And they say, oh yeah, that's right. He actually attacked another girl at a different church in a nearby town. And it was, well, is that everything you know? Take your time, search your memory. I think that's it. And then we do it again. And it was, well, did you know there was a cover up? Oh yeah, the Catholic Church covered it up and the police department, and it just demonstrated the problem. Now, that was fine in that little demonstration we did, but you could never do that in jury selection, because if you did that, you just poison that juror. If they don't know it, you just poison them. If they did know it, then you have to get rid of them, right? So you're in this impossible position in terms of trying to figure out if this juror can be truly fair and impartial when you don't know what they know.
Do we have a glimpse of how that works in Brian Kohberger's case based on the search warrant?
We do.
All right, how do we know? Tell me about that.
So we always use the open-ended question. What have you seen or heard about the case, and code it? And what we found is, on average, people reported 1.6 details when asked that open-ended question. So we know that's the average number of details they report. And then we compare that to the closed-ended questions later, those 9 media items, to see if there's additional items that they actually recognized that they failed to mention in the open. And what we found in this case was that 96% of survey respondents knew at least one of these media items that they failed to mention in the open. And on average, they recognized an additional 4.9 media items. So almost 5 out of the 9 failed to mention. And these are just some examples. So, someone said, what have you read, seen, or heard about this case? Just what has been on the TV and the papers. So that's minimization language. They use the word just. There's no specific detail. But later when we ask those closed-ended questions, that person knew all 9 of them. Another one is just what I've read and seen on the news and newspapers. Again, knew all 9. Read articles about the case, knew 8 of the 9. Just what I read in the papers, same as everyone else, 7 of the 9. So these are just a few examples, but this is what happens. This is what you see on juror questionnaires. This is what you see in voir dire. And I mentioned that, anyways.
And that's dangerous in this case because of the amount of prejudicial media coverage. Is that right?
It's dangerous in this case and in high profile cases. That's the unique problem they create. What's unusual in this one is, 1, it's in a small community, and 2, people here have very well developed schema and attitudes and case knowledge.
I think you have some specific examples of some of the media items tested about how many recognized an item that had not reported.
Yeah, so just to give it two examples to make the point. So this is the one we talked about, whether or not the defendant stalked one of the victims. Prejudicial, 45% of survey respondents recognize this item when we asked, have you read, seen, or heard it? But when we asked them the open-ended question, what have you read, seen, or heard about this case? Only 3% mentioned it on their own. So 3% of people reported this item, but 45% actually recognize it later on. And we know it's not only is it not true, but it's also prejudicial because 81% of people that know it have already judged the defendant as guilty. So it's really important to know who are the people in this panel that know that detail. So your choice is to just assume no one knows it because they didn't spontaneously mention it, or poison the well by asking the juror specifically, did you know that Brian Kohberger allegedly stalked the victim? So that's a difficult position to be in.
Let's look at one more example of how that works.
So this is the one about the knife sheath, whether or not police found a knife sheath on the bed. So you probably want to know that. Well, 81% of people recognize that item later, but only 8% mentioned it when asked the open-ended question. So again, just demonstrating the problem. These are items that are correlated with bias. We know that there's a high rate of recognition in the community, but when you ask in jury selection, what have you read, seen, or heard about the case? Very few people mention it. This is what you see.
All right. The magic question, can you set it aside and be fair and impartial? Is that going to work?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Is this going to work? This question.
Yeah. So you want to know, what is this a good question, bad question?
Will it work? Will it
How
help
will it
us,
work? What does work mean? I don't know if you think about that.
help us find an impartial jury?
No, there's no data to suggest that this is a valid question. And just touching on the research again, what you would expect is people that know a lot about the case or been exposed to prejudicial pretrial publicity would be more likely to say they cannot be fair and impartial compared to people that do not know a lot about the case. And it's not, there's no significant relationship. People who know a lot of detail and have been exposed to prejudicial pretrial publicity are just as likely to say they can be fair and impartial as people who have not. So there's no data to support that.
And do you have an example to tell us about?
So this is some research I did on this question to see how people respond to it. And so what I did was I went to a Facebook page that was about this documentary on HBO that got a lot of attention called The Jinx. The Jinx was about a person named Robert Durst who had been a suspect for multiple murders. For his wife, he went to trial in Texas for murder, and then a good friend of his in California was killed, and he was suspected to be involved in that as well. What was unique, he was from a very wealthy family in New York, so it captured a lot of people's attention. And there was this mini-series on HBO. And at the end of it, they confront him with some evidence that would suggest he was involved with his friend Susan's murder. And he takes a break and he goes into the bathroom and he forgot that he was wearing a microphone, and he pretty much confesses. He says, "Of course I shot them all," or "Of course I killed them all." He's talking to himself. So it was a highly prejudicial documentary. And later on, he was charged with the murder of his friend. So what we did was we went to this Facebook page where people had made public statements about the defendant that were highly prejudicial. So this is just one example. Someone said, "This is a true version or vision of a sociopath. I'm physically ill over the conclusion. I'm beside myself. I was overjoyed at the news that he was arrested." So if somebody said this in public about this case, I think we all agree that person probably can't be fair. You're publicly stating it to the world. You think he's a sociopath. So we recruited people that made these extreme comments on this page and went through a survey. And we asked if they knew about the case, whether they thought he was guilty, what they knew, and so on. You can see, as you'd expect, almost everybody we recruited who made these public statements reported that Robert Durst was guilty of murder, 92%. And reported strong opinion. 77% of the people we've recruited said that he could not change their mind about his guilt. So almost everyone. And then we asked those closed-ended case recognition questions, and many of these are either inadmissible or very prejudicial. That he was like a suspect in his wife's disappearance, probably not admissible in a different case. His murder trial in Texas, we asked several of these. And the confession, the captured confession, you see 100% knew that, which is considered like the most prejudicial thing that can be in the media, according to the Supreme Court. And so what we'd expect is that these people would say, "I cannot be fair and impartial." There's so much bias that they're demonstrating. So we give them the magic instruction that you often see. This came from a transcript in a high-profile case where the court had explained the burden of proof and that the defendant's entitled to a fair and impartial trial, and that the law requires that you set aside everything you know and only rely on the evidence, common things you hear. And all these people who express all this public bias and all this vitriol and reported that he's guilty and you can't change your mind, by just saying that to them, magically report that they can be fair and impartial. 81% said they could be fair and impartial after hearing that instruction. And they gave open-ended responses as to why. And so this is our participant who mentioned that they were overjoyed by his arrest and they were physically ill, and that Robert Durst was a sociopath. Well, on a scale of yes, definitely to no, definitely not, they reported that they could definitely be fair and impartial. And they reported that I could start from the beginning and listen to all the information presented and follow the directions and wipe out everything that I know. I would need to be convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt. So that answer, if you see in a courtroom without knowing that this person was making public statements about the defendant being a sociopath, probably considered rehabilitated, that's a fair and impartial juror. But it demonstrates like a person like that should be answering that question, no, but they don't. And even kind of going back to the Rideau case, which was recorded confession in the police station with the chief of police on one side and officers on the next, played in the media with music on it. It was highly prejudicial in a small town, and the Supreme Court ruled that, threw out the conviction because of it. All the jurors in that case who saw that confession reported that they could be fair and impartial. They all sat on that trial. They all reported that they could be fair, and the Supreme Court didn't take that at face value because the content of the coverage was so prejudicial.
All right. Based on your years of experience, your education, all of the work that you do in general, and then specifically the work that you've done in this case, the survey, the hundreds of comments, do you have an opinion about this case and whether we can seat an impartial jury in Lake County?
I did.
What is your opinion?
So my opinion is, again, is based on whether or not there's a reasonable likelihood. So using that standard, which is less than the preponderance of the evidence, Lake County is a small venue, and the crime has been seared in the community's consciousness. People have been saturated with prejudicial coverage. Many people here have direct and indirect connections to this crime. People here demonstrated they experienced fear and stress, panic in this community. There's significant rumors and misinformation that have been spread and people have been exposed to in this community. There's a feeling of pressure to convict, I think, given the reaction that people think the community would have if he's acquitted. That's particularly concerning. We know from the data that jurors have closely followed the case, they've talked about it, they're familiar with prejudicial details. I think that the presumption of innocence has been undermined and a presumption of guilt prevails in this community. And I think the pre-existing attitudes and opinions will influence how people process evidence. So even if the same information is presented at trial, there's a big difference in terms of jurors being exposed to that for the first time. I don't know about the DNA evidence. I don't know about the videos versus a juror being exposed to something that they already know, where they're just confirming what they already know. I already know about the DNA evidence. It's just triggering a memory of what I already recall. And I'm processing this information through that filter of it's consistent with what I believe and I already know. And it impacts how they see government witnesses and how they will view and evaluate defense witnesses. And I don't think voir dire is an effective remedy, given the research I've done, my experience doing jury selections, and the nature of how memory works. So taking all that combined, I think it's appropriate to change that.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions, Your Honor. And Dr. Edelman, hang tight if you should state mine.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Taylor. So this would be a good time to take a break.
Sure.
And we'll come back at 3:20. Thank you. Dr. Edelman.
No.
Yeah, so I've been sort of looking at Twitter as I was listening, and there's many people in here that just don't understand what's happening here. They keep saying, well, Brian's going to be found guilty no matter where he goes. Everywhere has heard of this. And I don't think that's not the argument here. The argument here is the interconnectedness of this community and like the types of pressures, social pressures they will feel to come back with a guilty verdict, and that their safety could be in danger, or their perceived safety could be in danger if they don't bring back a guilty verdict. So I guess this is what like, so I guess, are the people who are saying that, like, are they part of exactly what Dr. Edelman is talking about here? That when they're saying that they just can't be unbiased. It's fascinating that people just completely turn off the issue here and they try to make it about something that it's not about. I think that Dr. Edelman is doing a great job explaining this. I mean, I feel like if it was like any other case, they may not have to go through all this. They'd be like, okay, yeah, they would just grant the motion, and they have done that before. But this is also kind of cool that we get to see them go step by step. And we get to see what Dr. Edelman did. It's absolutely great. I guess when they come back from break, Beatty is the attorney that I guess will do cross if they're going to do cross. I'm interested. Because the last time Dr. Edelman was on cross, that is when Bill Thompson went off. And that is when somebody made the decision that he's just not going to be first chair. He couldn't control himself. But I don't think we'll be that lucky. I don't think Bill Thompson's going to cross him again. I kind of want him to, but because Dr. Edelman, he can handle Bill. So yeah, I can't believe it. Let me see if I can show one of my shorts here.
Everything I use was widely disseminated through the media. Widely disseminated.
Did you find out where the media got the information?
Yes.
Good afternoon, folks. My name's Bill Thompson.
That'll never
I'm
get
the Utah
old.
County prosecutor.
You turn it up.
I can't hear.
Kohberger,
Everything I used was widely disseminated through the media. Widely disseminated.
Did you find out where the media got the information?
Yes.
good afternoon, folks. My name's Bill Thompson. I'm the Utah County prosecutor.
You turn it up.
I can't hear.
Kohberger,
Everything I used was widely disseminated through the media. Widely disseminated.
Did you find out where the media got the information?
That is so funny. So I'm gonna play this one.
Based on your, I guess, not as thorough as you'll do review of these records, we're doing to defend Mr. Kohberger.
Given the timing of these records, from what I can tell in the emails that were produced by Detective Mallory, these records were generated on the 23rd of December. It's when everything started with probable cause statements. If I had to pick a time when the wheels fell off the wagon, that's the date. There are statements and there's assumptions made in the records that will never be supported by the data. there's a lot of claims that are said in these emails, and even the name files of the record.
Isn't that interesting? He's talking about claims and emails, just emails between the law enforcement that even whatever they're talking about will never be supported. I think that's interesting that like even when they're talking about the evidence, I guess maybe that they do have, it won't be supported.
Records are problematic, but it does not represent what it's claimed to represent.
Sounds like those might be pretty important to us defending Mr. Kohberger.
Why certain things were being looked at before Mr. Kohberger's arrest or well into late in the year, and pieced together. Is that something that the state is still seeking because they're pursuing the alternate suspects that exist in this case? Why certain things were being looked at before Mr. Kohberger's arrest or well into late in the year, in 2023 related to the victims, and try to piece together, is that something that the state is still seeking because they're pursuing the alternate suspects that exists in this case?
Oh, here we go. This is what we want to see.
You acknowledge false that Mr. Kohberger allegedly stalked one of the victims. That's false. You know that to be false.
Which one?
That Mr. Kohberger allegedly stalked one of the victims.
Yes, I was trying not to say that because.
But you knew that was false. Yes. And so you have now, for anybody who had never heard that before, that question is now planted into them, unqualified representation that Mr. Kohberger stalked one of the witnesses, and that's false.
That's false. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
And everybody's just awkwardly silent. They're like, what just happened? That's so funny. Do you think we'll get round two of this?
You acknowledge false that Mr. Kohberger allegedly stalked one of the victims. That's false. You know that to be false.
Which one?
That Mr. Kohberger allegedly stalked one of the victims.
Yes, I was trying not to say that because.
But you knew that was false.
I did.
Yes. And so you have now, for anybody who had never heard that before, that question is now planted into them, unqualified representation that Mr. Kohberger stalked one of the witnesses, and that's false.
That's false. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
And that was the day the entire case fell apart. That's crazy. Mm.
Of data, some of the most significant locations in this case, we're missing some data.
Those significant locations, have they been depicted or captured on the CAS draft report?
They have.
And tell me what those locations are. What are we missing?
I am unable to find any measurements along, I believe it's 270, the Moscow-Pullman Road. If you drove the most direct route from Pullman to Moscow or vice versa, pretty much as soon as you're leaving Pullman to the time that you arrive in Moscow, we are missing that entire stretch. And if there's ever been a case that we need to look at, what does it look like when a phone travels from Pullman?
Yeah, and this route is important because law enforcement, they need to document that so that they can show this car came in, it was driving around the locations where they say it was driving around in the probable cause affidavit. If they can't support the statement that they have video of the car driving around Moscow or in the King Road neighborhood, then they should not have made that statement. Then it is a misleading statement. And you have an expert here who's seen all of the data, all of the cell phone records, all of the things that law enforcement did to put together that PCA and their case. He was even seeing emails, and he was saying previously, we watched a short where the things that the law enforcement were saying in emails will never be substantiated with the information that they have. So this is a key piece of evidence here to support the fact that there was a car, any car. If you want it to be the 2015 white Elantra, they don't have that. He's stating that right here. So for law enforcement to say we have on video a 2015 Hyundai Elantra driving into the King Road neighborhood and then, you know, doing the whatever loops they say and then speeding off at 4:23 a.m. or whatever time it was, you're going to need video evidence to back up what you're saying there, and they don't have that.
Poland and Moscow, this is probably the case. We have the neighborhood around the crime scene, but we don't have the crime scene.
So they don't have the crime scene either. So is there? Okay, so that would mean the car that's speeding away is. Does that mean it's not on camera? So again, how can law enforcement make these claims if they don't have around the crime scene? So he wouldn't have said, I don't have the cell phone data for these locations if there was videotape for those locations, because that videotape can substantiate those statements without the cell phone data. So he's not going to get up there and say, you know, the cell phone doesn't say this, and then just leave out the part where the car's on video. He's not going to do that because that's going to cause questions. So he's pointing out he doesn't have any of the information. And he said there's a video here where he lists the things that he needs. He needs everything to make that cast report. He needs the cell phone records. He needs the driving test. He needs the video that corroborates where the car is driving. He needs all of it. Let's see if we can find that video. So when he's saying he doesn't have information for the most important route to prove that this car went where law enforcement said it went, he's missing it. I think that's one of my videos. It's not a short. Let's see. Yeah. I think it's this one. Okay. So we'll have to watch that one that we do next. So Detective Payne says, I have the two links for both of their testimonies that support this list and this list in the link in the description of this video. But Payne says he uses Nick Balance's cash draft report, but Cyray has also stated that he doesn't believe Payne actually saw a cast report, that Kane probably saw some mapping. And then he also uses Special Agent Imel's vehicle identification. But Special Agent Imel, he identified the 2011 to 2013 first. And we also watched a video earlier in the first part where the state gave them they gave over that material, and Aunt Taylor has it. She said she doesn't want any more surprises. She doesn't want to, have more of the 2011 to 2013 footage to be turned over. Like, she's like, that's fine if that's all you have, but I want to make sure that is all you have of that vehicle. Verbal communication. And as we know, there are emails as well. And Cyree had just said in that video we just watched, the things that are written in the emails won't be substantiated. Verbal communication doesn't really, that's not going to be good enough for, everything needs to be documented. So we don't really know what they talked about when they were doing verbal communication. Open source satellite imagery, open source mapping. So that could be something like Google Maps, or some sort of mapping program where he was able to make that, Payne was able to make that map in the PCA. Now, this is what Payne used. Cyree is saying these are the things that he needs to be able to confirm the route that Brett Payne claims in his second AT&T warrant, which is that route from Pullman to Moscow and all around the neighborhood. So to prove everything that Payne was saying about the movement of a car and the cell phone in the PCA, these are the things an expert, not just Cyree, any expert that you're going to get up there to confirm that that route is accurate, that Brett Payne mapped. He needs the call detail records from AT&T, a loc bar that is some other sort of document that I think has time, the drive testing itself, and there should be multiple drive tests because I think they did they do around the neighborhood, but they don't have the crime scene or to and from where Bryan supposedly is in Pullman to Moscow. Time and distance measurements. Now, Cyree said this in addition to the drive testing. So there's more measurements that you need to take to pair with the drive testing, the local bar, and the CDR records. Number 5, documentation on how the phone is interacting with other cell sites. And according to Cyree, this is significant because there were cell tower lists that were missing. And apparently Payne relied on some cell towers. Number 6, regional cell tower list from AT&T. And it wasn't included in the December 23, 2022 warrant. I believe that's the second AT&T warrant, or it could be the first. See, that's confusing. And that's another thing, that 2 warrants aren't usually that close, within an hour of each other at the same time. So we don't really know when they were signed, and it's kind of weird. But because Detective Payne already has stated in the PCA that Bryan's phone wasn't connected to the towers that Payne was looking at. I guess the ones around the crime scene. And so Cyree is saying, well, I need those, and I also need the other ones. Because if you have information for the cell phone towers where the phone was actually connecting to, then that's going to really help. And I think he only mentioned that because he has those. He has those lists. He has that information where Bryan's phone was connecting to different towers. And it's very weird how Payne would not include that in the PCA or in the discovery that was handed over to the defense. It's very odd that he would omit that. And this right here is like a misleading statement. If Cyree was able to find the cell towers that Bryan connected to. So in the PCA, it never says the phone was turned off. It's just not where Brett Payne's looking for it. And that's exactly what Brian was saying. No, my phone wasn't where you were looking for it because I was over here in Washington. And then before you create a cast, you would have all of this data and you would put all of it in a map. So Syra would need, or any expert would need, mapping of all this data before the cast team exports all of it out into a report. And Syra has saying that he doesn't believe this was done. He believes that Brett Payne was mistaken, that Brett Payne didn't see this. He may have saw some mapping, but as you can see here, there's a clear difference between the information that Brett Payne relied on, the information required to make statements like Brett Payne did in the PCA. And this isn't all of it. This is just what he's able to tell us as the public, as lay people. I'm sure that if he was talking to another expert, this would be a lot more detailed. So it's important to have accurate information and to rely upon required information to make statements, because there's this Innocent Project, and 53% of all of their cases involve the misapplication of forensic science. Forensic science is not only DNA, a lot of it is DNA, but this is forensic cell phone data, which it's misleading how Brett Payne put his information together, and it's misleading that the information that is needed wasn't turned over to the defense. It also says here, prior to our founding in 1992, there was widespread belief that the criminal legal system was infallible, and with it, a lack of understanding surrounding wrongful conviction. Through our work over the years, we have identified several basic patterns and common reasons for wrongful conviction. They're taking a little while. Are they back yet? Oh, they are back. All right, I'm gonna go to this page and hit play.
Kohberger still in the courtroom along with counsel and also counsel for the state. And Mr. Edelman is ready for cross-examination, I believe, and you're still under oath. So go ahead.
And actually, Your Honor, the state has everything it needs from Dr. Edelman, so we won't be doing any cross.
Oh, okay. May this witness be excused.
Whoa,
Your Honor.
Okay, thank you.
that's it?
You're free to stay.
We don't
free
even
to
get
leave.
some
Thank
fiery.
you. Appreciate for you being here.
Ooh,
Okay.
they can't.
Another witness?
Yes, Your Honor, our last witness is Dr. Dare.
There. Okay, I thought maybe Dr. Dare was going to be rebuttal to the state. No.
Your Honor, we disclosed Dr. Dare twofold. First, to talk to the court about the survey instrument itself, and then to provide rebuttal testimony. Part of that is going to come based on the state's objection too. So I don't know if the state has any witnesses to call, but we ask that she stay for that if that's the case.
Okay. So Dr. Dare, line it up.
Oh,
Please face clerk, raise your hand.
Okay.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Please have a seat, and then once you're seated, please state your name and spell your last.
Yes, Veronica Dare, D-A-H-I-R.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor? Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon. All right, let's start with your occupation. What do you do?
I am the director of the Grant Sawyer Center for Justice Studies at the University of Nevada, Reno. I'm also the director of survey operations for the Nevada Center for Surveys, Evaluation, and Statistics, also at the University of Nevada, Reno.
Do you also do consultations outside of your role with the university?
Yes, occasionally.
And is it in that capacity that you're here today?
No, today I'm here independent of my role at the University of Nevada, Reno. I am here as an expert consultant, and that is independent of my work at the university, although my testimony is based on my previous experience, knowledge, and education that I received at the university.
I'm going to talk a little bit more about what you do for work, but let me back up and find out about your educational background.
I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's and PhD in interdisciplinary social psychology from the University of Nevada, Reno. My master's and PhD are from the University of Nevada, Reno.
Hello, Erica.
In terms of my work at the university, I have a joint appointment, as I mentioned. I run two different research centers at the university. One, as I mentioned, is the Grant Sawyer Center for Justice Studies, and the other one is a survey lab. I also teach in the Judicial Studies program. I teach a graduate level course called Scientific Research Methods for Judges, which is a course for judges getting their PhD across the nation. They're sitting judges that are on the bench. I teach another course called Scientific Methods for the Justice Management Program, which is a master's degree program at the university. I have taught social psychology, criminal justice research methods. I've taught other courses, but that was quite a while ago. Right now, I'm just teaching this graduate level course. I serve on several dissertation committees for various departments on campus: social psychology, psychology, School of Public Health, computer science, natural sciences. There's many. I serve as a dissertation advisor and committee member for students that are getting their degrees, and primarily in the Judicial Studies program, I have served as an advisor, and as well as the social psychology program on campus. In terms of my role on campus, I do primarily, let's take the Sawyer Center first. We do research on justice-related topics broadly defined. My background is social psychology with an emphasis in justice studies and law. And so our research that we've been doing there is specifically related to research in the justice system. We have many different populations that we research and do surveys with, including jurors, judges, attorneys, both defense and prosecution, court reporters. We've done many surveys on diverse populations as well, including people experiencing homelessness, LGBTQIA populations, the elderly, prisoners, inmates, Native American populations. So we've done many, many surveys in that capacity. In my role as the survey director for the Center for Surveys, Evaluation, Statistics, I am in charge of multiple research projects that have to do with surveys nationally, regionally, and locally. Most predominantly, the one that we have been doing since I've been there in 2006 is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, otherwise known as the CDC, their BRFSS survey, which stands for Behavioral Risk multi-factor surveillance system. I am the project coordinator for Nevada, and I've been doing that role since 2000 for the state of Nevada for the last 3 years. But before that, I was the data collection supervisor for this project since 2006. So I've been working on that project for quite a while. Prior to my role in both of these programs, I also worked on surveys. I've been doing, I would say, surveys and research for almost 30 years. Since I've been a graduate student and even before that. So not before graduate student, well, I did research, but before my role in this area, I did research. Most predominantly for the Sawyer Center, we did a nationwide survey on Daubert, and it entailed 400 randomly sampled judges across the nation. And we looked at the effect of Daubert on judicial decision-making. In both of my roles, I work with many organizations to do surveys. We do work for, besides the CDC that I mentioned, many state agencies, Nevada Department of Transportation, Department of Training and Department of Employment, Training and Rehabilitation. I won't do all the acronyms. I won't do that to you, so because I can shoot off all the acronyms, but we work with the National Judicial College. They're right on campus. I'm in the building, actually. National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. We've worked on projects with the Federal Judicial Center, the State Justice Institute, and many more organizations. I know you're going to ask me other questions, but I wanted to get those out. So
I do have a couple of questions for you. You said 30 years of your life you've spent doing this work.
yes,
And it sounds like it has a whole lot to do with survey work.
yes,
Is that both designing surveys and then critiquing surveys?
yes. So we have done numerous projects, as I mentioned. You're probably going to ask me, so I'll just say it. We have published in academic journals. I personally have published on different aspects of survey research in Judicature, Justice System Journal, Future of Evidence by the American Bar Association. I have a chapter in there. That one's not specific to surveys, sorry. I have other publications, but specific to surveys, Survey Practice Journal, Law and Human Behavior on the judge survey that we had done. There are numerous. I don't know if I can remember them all right now, but in terms of technical reports, we do a lot of technical reports for our projects. And those are basically reports of findings that we give to our clients specifically to use for their organizations based on whatever topic it is that they want us to survey or study. So I mentioned some of them before. We DETR, which is Department of Employment, Training and Rehabilitation, Nevada Department of Transportation, Nevada Department of Corrections. I don't think I mentioned that one. And we've done 140 over my career there, 140 technical reports, all of which in some way or fashion have related to surveys or survey research. We do a lot of evaluation projects, needs assessments, and most of those always entail a survey of some kind.
Are there guidelines or standards that govern survey work?
Yes, ones that have been mentioned here already. APOR, the American Association of Public Opinion Research, and specifically for change of venue surveys or community attitude surveys, ASTC, which is the American Society of Trial Consulting.
Are you familiar with the standards of both?
Yes, I'm a member of both organizations.
I want to know why people do surveys. It sounds like you've had a hand in a lot of surveys over the years. Why do people do surveys?
Many different reasons to find out information about a specific topic or population. People do it for needs assessments. They do it to find out more about support services. If they want to increase support services in their organization, or if they want to just find out an evaluation of what their program is, if they receive funding from a government organization or a grant to do a specific project, they want it evaluated, and that usually entails surveys. people want to know community attitudes. For example, as I mentioned, a couple of them, we did a survey for the Nevada Department of Transportation, specifically looking at highway maintenance in the state of Nevada, asking residents about their opinions on highway safety. We did another one for the Office of Traffic Safety, looking at seatbelt usage, car seat usage, and at the time when cell phones came out, texting and driving, distracted driving behavior. So we've done surveys on those. I'm currently doing a survey with DETR, which I had mentioned, DETR, on foreign labor wage surveys, where we're looking at the farmers in the state of Nevada on whether or not what their wage, the prevailing wages in the state of Nevada. There are many reasons in the justice system. For example, we do surveys on judicial, attitudes, jury attitudes, decision making, looking at specific attitudes towards specific crimes. I did a survey on human trafficking. We did another survey on victims of crime. I could go on. Marketing research. You guys have been asked to take many surveys about projects that not projects, but things you bought, things that, they ask you to evaluate restaurants. You get surveys all the time. People do it, as you know, in the election that's coming up. I'm sure you guys have got bombarded with many surveys. Not all of those are valid, by the way. They're called push polls, but anyway, that's something different. But there are lots of surveys that reasons people do surveys, primarily to make decisions and to form policy, to reform policy, to make changes within their organization. And in this case, to assess community attitudes, bias, and the potential impact of pretrial publicity.
Sounds like it's to gain information, and that's in order to make a decision.
Yes, decision making, and especially within their organizations, and then related to policy. We do a lot of policy change as well. We've actually presented reports to the legislature for whoever our clients are. Like, for example, the seatbelt survey that we did. We were trying to do a survey of Nevada residents to see if they should have a primary seatbelt law in Nevada. I was involved in what we call Assembly Bill 122 in Nevada, where they were looking at the assisted living communities within the entire state of Nevada to see if there should be change in those areas. So those are some examples. And primarily, I guess a good example would be the behavioral health, BRFSS again, by the CDC. The biggest thing that we use that survey for is to look at population health and health outcomes. So we ask questions like behavioral risk that's related to how many fruits and vegetables do you eat in a day? How often do you exercise? We ask about drug practices, substance abuse, sexual practices, whether or not they've ever been told that they've had diabetes or a heart condition or asthma. So those are examples. So we look at the indicators that could predict or have outcomes on the population health. So outcomes, basically.
I heard you mention community attitude surveys. Are you familiar with those?
Yes, I mentioned a couple of the examples that we have done community attitudes on. And that's basically measuring attitudes of the community on a specific target population on specific measures of interest.
Did you have an occasion to review the community attitude survey that Dr. Edelman conducted relating to venue issues?
Yes, I did. Excuse me. I forgot. I have these.
Okay.
Exhibit F and F1. It's just my declaration and my expert report that I've already provided to the court.
Okay. And I can see you just place those face down. If you need to place them back face up, will you let me know?
Yeah, I will. Sorry. What was can you repeat the question?
That's okay. I'm wondering if you had an opportunity to review the survey work done and conducted by Dr. BRYAN Edelman.
Yes, I have.
Okay. And do you have an opinion about whether that survey was conducted in a valid way?
Yes, I do.
What is your?
In my opinion, it was a valid survey.
What do you base that opinion on?
So there are standards and professional code of ethics that I mentioned earlier, suggested by APOR, again, AAPOR, American Association of Public Opinion Research, and the American Society of Trial Consulting, ASTC. And specifically, ASTC has a section on venue change surveys. And there are many things that can go into a survey to determine its validity and reliability. I guess I should talk about that before I go into that. When you're talking about scientific reliability, by the way, it's very different than evidentiary reliability. So evidentiary reliability is looking at the trustworthiness of evidence, whereas scientific reliability is looking at the consistency and repetition of a survey done over time, across different populations. And validity is more looking at trustworthiness or accuracy. So if we talk about reliability as consistency and stability of results, and validity as accuracy, that's how I'm going to talk about those things. And with respect specifically to this survey, there are many types of validity and many types of reliability, but I'm not going to go into all of them here. I think specifically for this survey, what's important is content validity, construct validity, measurement reliability, and response reliability, specifically with this survey, and looking at coverage error and what we would call external validity. There are other types, as I mentioned. There's criterion validity, there's inter-rater reliability, test-retest reliability, convergent validity. There's many types of validity, but I'm not going to talk about those here. I'm just going to talk about the things that made me come to my opinion or form my opinion based on the survey. According to the ASTC standards, when you're doing a change of venue or community attitude survey to look at whether or not a change of venue should be conducted, or a change of venue might be considered, you want to look at 6 things. You have screener questions, you have case recognition questions, you have questions related to the source or the media where the information comes from, you have demographic information, and then case knowledge questions. I think I got them all. And that's what I was looking at with respect to the content. And those were all there in Dr. Edelman's survey. The other thing I looked at was the questions themselves. Do they have what we would call construct validity, which is basically, does the survey measure what it purports to measure? And then does it have content validity? Does it cover all those things? And it does. I mentioned that already. That's the content validity, those 6 items. And was it done in a way that you can consider it? The measurement was reliable, and I would say yes. I read the methodology was brief, but based on what I could gather from the report that Research Strategies did, they did all of the things that we would have done. I would have probably done a little bit more in terms of looking at, some of the disposition codes were just a little bit hard to determine, but that's not that important for this. What I would say is that they did everything we do in our lab. We are very strict, I would say strict when it comes to our methodology for our surveys, because we follow APOR, which is the strictest standards that you could follow for calling on a telephone survey, or what we call an RDD survey, random digit dialing. And primarily that's because we have to do the CDC survey, and the CDC survey follows the APOR guidelines. And so for all of our projects, whether it's BRFSS, whether it's CDC or not, we follow the same protocol. So no matter what project we do, whether it be for NDOT or DETR or any of these other organizations that I mentioned, we would definitely follow the same protocol procedures. And that includes things like good questionnaire construction and design. That's the first thing. In order to combat what we would call non-response bias, the first thing you look at is questionnaire design. Are the questions written in a way that would get the responses that you need? Do they have content validity? Are the questions valid? And by that, I mean, we look at things like question order. We look at the whether they're leading, whether they're loaded, whether they're double barreled, whether there's many things we look at. So I looked at that. And then we also look at how the survey was sampled. And according to Research Strategies, they did use a random digit sampling frame. And by that means they probably, I don't have all the details. I'm just going based on my opinion, my experience. What we do for our surveys is we order our sample from a sampling company and we get replicates of phone numbers. And what that means is we get them in blocks of like 30, for example, and you would call your replicates of 30 phone numbers until completion. And that's to make sure that you are not biasing your sample. So you don't want to call, here's an example. If you get 20,000 phone numbers, you don't want to call all 20,000 phone numbers just once. That's not how it works, because you're only getting those people that answer the phone on the first ring. So that's biasing. Also, you're reducing your response rate by doing that. So what we do is we call them in blocks of numbers, and we call them several times. From my understanding, they called them 4 times. Research Strategies is they called once, if they didn't get a hold of them, they called 3 more times, they did callbacks. That's also proper protocol. We like to call our surveys at least 3 times during 3 different time periods, either the morning, afternoon, and evening. We also like to call them during the day and on the weekends. My survey lab that I run is open 7 days a week, and every single holiday except for Christmas, Thanksgiving, and believe it or not, Super Bowl Sunday. It's the other American holiday, apparently. Anyway, people get mad when you call them on Super Bowl Sunday versus Father's Day, Mother's Day, and Easter, believe it or not. But anyway, so we call these numbers at different times. And from what I could tell, they did follow-ups, they did different call timing, they did callbacks, they did the replicates, they used both cell phone and landline. It is customary practice now when you're looking at coverage validity, you want to get more you want to make sure you're getting the population that you're interested in. And now so many people have cell phones. So in our lab and most labs across the country now, we do like 90% cell phones versus 10% landline. Now it's customary because of the reduction in the number of people that have landlines. Anyway, those are some of the things that I looked at, and whether the questions themselves, like I said, were valid in terms of what they were being asked.
It sounds like
Did I answer the question?
you had a really
Okay.
thorough look
Okay.
before you had your opinion as to whether the survey was valid.
Yes.
Do you have an opinion about whether it was reliable?
Yes. In terms of measurement reliability, which includes things like if you are an interviewer and you are asking questions, it could be biasing if you're not trained properly. And the mode of survey that you're doing for change of venue surveys, the typical mode is RDD surveys, which is phone surveys versus paper or in person. And so the interviewers must be trained and supervised. My understanding is that Research Strategy has been around for 20 plus years. So I'm assuming they're like our lab where they were trained properly and they have supervision where there's supervisors also supervising the interviewers. So that's another way to combat non-response bias, which includes refusal conversion training, which is, I think Dr. Edelman alluded to it earlier, things like soft refusals. If someone calls up and says, I'm making dinner, I'm too busy, I'm giving my kids a bath, I'm running to the store, whatever it is. We train the interviewers on how to handle those situations so that we don't get only the first person that answers the phone or only those people that are saying that they're busy. So that's all part of the training to make sure that we get at non-response.
Right. I think that you have answered my questions really well, and based on, just to sum it up, based on your look at the work done by Dr. Edelman with this survey, your opinion is that it's a valid survey.
Yes, basically it's what I would have done or what we would have done in our survey lab.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions right now, but hang on and ask Peter.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have no questions for this witness, Your Honor.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh.
Is it
Nobody that easy.
so easy? So, thank you. Witness be released.
She may, Your Honor.
Okay.
Oh wow, no rebuttal.
Thank you for being here.
Us.
It's very interesting.
You think we'll see Eliza closing?
Help yourself, yeah, as much as you need.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, you called it, Erica. My God.
All right.
Fit for witnesses, Your Honor.
No more witnesses. Okay. Any witnesses?
None from the state, Your Honor.
Okay,
No
we're prepared
witnesses.
for argument?
Let's do it.
Okay. go
Oh,
ahead.
Anne's ready.
Thank
I
you.
love it. Let's do it. She's so cute.
Your Honor, the decision to change venue rests on what you've heard today and the court's determination that there's a reasonable likelihood that all of the media coverage has impacted the impartiality of a Latah County jury. That comes from Paul and Shepard. Your Honor, it's important to think of that standard in light of the Constitution of the United States and the state of Idaho. Mr. Kohberger has a constitutional right to a fair trial by an impartial jury. And to guarantee that, this court must change venue. Your Honor can look at the media coverage in this case and know that it's prejudicial coverage. The amount of coverage is a huge amount of coverage. The kind of coverage is prejudicial coverage, and it's had an impact on the Latah County potential juror. The court can see actual prejudice by understanding the results of that survey. Reading the hundreds of comments from Latah County residents, you can see that the media has been prejudicial and it's actually prejudiced potential jurors in Latah County. The court can also presume prejudice by looking at this case as it is. It's an extreme case that comes out of the Haddon case in Idaho, and you can presume prejudice in an extreme case. You have heard all day long how much coverage this case garners. It's Latah County, it's bigger, it's a state of Idaho, it's nationwide, it's outside of the nation, it's continuous, it's every day. Social media, books have been written, primetime television shows have happened in this case. It just doesn't stop. And you know that this is prejudicial coverage as well. The state has agreed things that were surveyed are false media items. At least some of them. This is all before the other things contained in the media are subject to admissibility rules, even if they're offered. Subject to cross-examination and full context explanation of what they mean. So you have this coverage that permeates the community. Bigger than the community, the state, bigger than the state, the nation, and this is an extreme case. The court should think about things that have happened in this courtroom too, when considering whether this is an extreme case and the amount of prejudice that exists. This court has issued courtroom rules to determine who can have a camera, where a camera can be. The court on our motion limited things and finally removed cameras from this courtroom, and the court right now is live streaming. That doesn't take care of all of it though. The live stream is captured and replayed almost in real time, if not real time. Everything that happens in this case is on social media, and all kinds of things that don't happen in this case run rampant in news stories, in social media stories, and impact all of the jurors. It is particularly important when you're considering this extreme case to look at the size of this community. You heard a lot about that today. You heard how bias is created. And when you think about this little community and all of the people that spoke out early on about this case, that's how the bias starts in this case. People in this community have a lot of ownership in the case as well. They're connected to the case by being related to or knowing people that conducted the investigation. They're connected to the case by knowing the community leaders that have spoken out about the case. They're connected to the case by the relationship with the University of Idaho. That's a pretty tight connection. And that is how you have to think about the human bias that exists and how it cannot be fixed if we get to jury selection. Your Honor has to look at the content and know the content of the media and know that there hasn't been positive stories about Bryan Kohberger. It's negative stories. There's not a media story talking about Bryan Kohberger's right to be presumed innocent. There's not a media story talking about Bryan Kohberger being loved by his family. Nobody's talking about the good grades he achieved all through his undergraduate career and graduate programs. Nobody's talking about the dog that he loves and helped train. It's all negative. It's false. It's misleading. It's stuff that's rumor and never coming into court. There are things about his character that are just untrue that are out there. When you have this much information surrounding a case, it's an extreme case and it's all over the place. I don't want the court to think all this social media happens and it's not centered in Latah County and think that's okay, because it's just not. There's plenty that's centered in Latah County. I'm sure the court remembers where we started earlier today with the two pie charts that we were shown by Crusoe this morning. One talks about how big the coverage is in Latah County that projects into Latah County compared to how small of a piece of the pie of the whole population in Idaho that Latah County is. So that's a lot of coverage directed into Latah County, and that's the stuff. Those are the news stories, the nightly news that's coming into Latah County residents' TVs. That's their newspaper that they're going to get in the morning. But that's not all. Latah County has as much access to primetime news stories, as much access to Facebook groups, to different podcasts, to watch things on YouTube, to buy books containing misinformation. They have as much access to do that as anybody else. So you have to recognize how big the case is, how much coverage there is, and just how prejudicial the coverage is. You understand that, we understand that learning from Dr. L. O'Leary this morning, when she talked about bias. So having that as a backdrop and thinking about the survey results that we just talked about, you can see that there is a huge correlation to the few media items that could be tested and prejudgment of guilt for Mr. Kohberger. And those are people in Latah County. You can see the case connections that are bigger than the other counties, and they just don't go away. You also should be aware that the coverage doesn't drop off. It's not going to stop. It may peak and it may dip a little bit. It comes right back up. You can expect that will continue. We have a pretty good schedule of hearings coming up for pretrial motions. The court issued a scheduling order a couple of months ago. And so you can expect that the interest in the case is going to pop back up every single time we have one of those hearings. And that's a lot of media coverage, and people in Latah County are going to see it and read it, and they're going to continue with their opinions. So what do we do? What do we do about it? It's tough. It's really tough in Idaho. There is a lot of case recognition, and there's prejudgment in Idaho, but there's hope. When you look at the survey and you recognize that in other parts of this state, people don't recognize as many media items as they do in Latah County. That's good, because that links right to prejudgment. So that's good. That's hope right there, that we can find a jury somewhere in this state to give Mr. Kohberger his right to a fair trial. It's also a much larger population, so the impact on people sitting on the jury would be much smaller. Imagine with me that we are here in June of 2025, and we're here and we've seated 16 or so people over here. You're going to recognize some of them. People that sit in the courtroom in our audience that want to come and listen to the trial are going to see them. Even if they don't listen to the trial, people are going to know whose car leaves their driveway every morning to get to the courthouse by 8:30 for 3 solid months. And those jurors that sit over there are going to feel an immense amount of pressure to answer the call of the community to be safe. you can read those comments about what people in this community think about Mr. Kohberger and what they think would happen if the jury found him innocent. It's hard to imagine that one of those jurors who all of a sudden said, you know what? I'm not sure, and listened to more evidence and said, I'm really not sure. I don't think he did it. Are they going to be brave enough to do that? To write not guilty, to say not guilty, and to stand their ground? That comes right to impartiality, that the court has to be sure that that's not going to happen. You can't be sure that there's a way to pick an impartial jury in this community. In Ada County, we don't have that. We don't have Canyon County, we also don't have that. Those are jurors that are not from this small, close-knit community. Those are jurors who aren't going to run into a police officer that investigated the case at the grocery store, or maybe somebody from the prosecutor's office at the jazz festival at the college. They're people who don't have those connections. The other difference that I think is really important to think about too is the location, the connection to the house where this happened. That has been a pretty big deal in the community and wider, but in the community about whether the house should remain standing through trial or should be torn down. And there's been an awful lot of publicity about that. People in this community have an opinion one way or the other. We aren't going to know what their opinion is, but they're going to bring that into the courtroom. People in Ada County do not have. And why Ada? Why not Canyon, or why not Bannock? I think that's something that we should talk about. The easiest one to talk about is Bannock. The numbers look a little better there in a lot of regards, but it's a smaller community as well. And so I think that there's a danger that if the court says, I'm going to change venue and we're going to Bannock County, I think there's a danger with that small community. There could be more interest all of a sudden, and we may run into a bit of a problem. So that's why I'm not here telling you Bannock County, but if you tell us Bannock County, I think we have a lot better shot at seating an impartial jury than we do here in Latah. Canyon County is the second largest. And Your Honor, honestly, if the court says, let's change venue, let's go to Canyon County or Bannock County, I think we have a better shot at getting an impartial jury. But we picked Ada County specifically because we're aware of the structure of that courthouse, the way it's set up. We're aware that there's at least some statewide precedent for moving these big cases to Ada County. And we're aware that it would be easier to get our jurors to and from that courthouse in a way that they wouldn't have to go through the media. They would be kept private and in secret and secure. It makes sense to focus on Ada County for a lot of those reasons. Your Honor, we're mindful that that's a lot of miles away from here. But at the end of the day, the interest that we have is to protect BRYAN Kohberger's constitutional rights. His right to a fair trial is as important as our right to free speech, our right to bear arms, our right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. And the right to a fair trial cannot happen in Latah County. There is way too much media coverage. It is biased media coverage. It has impacted the potential juror, and it causes bias in the potential juror. This is a tiny little community, and this case needs to move where there's a chance to get jurors that haven't prejudged guilt of Mr. Kohberger and will have the ability to be anonymous and not known by everybody else in the community. The pressure to convict here is great, and it won't be in Ada County. The venue needs to be changed.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Ms. Beatty?
Thank you, Your Honor. The case law in this case just does not support a change of venue, given the evidence that the court has before it. The state does not disagree with counsel on what the appropriate standard is. The appropriate standard is that the defense has the burden of showing a reasonable likelihood that the defendant's ability to get a fair trial is going to be diminished as opposed to some other county, or put another way, a reasonable likelihood that pretrial publicity will deprive him of a fair trial. So in looking at the evidence the court has before it, we can start with Exhibit C. Those were the charts presented by TrueScope. And we can see in those charts that for at least 6 months on one of those line graphs that compared Ada County and Latah County, Ada County had significantly more coverage than Latah County. And that more recently, in the past couple of months, that line graph comes together again, and they're just a couple points off. The fact is, Your Honor, this case has media coverage everywhere. That is something that was acknowledged by the defense, and that is something that is abundantly clear in these surveys. So looking to Exhibit C, comparing Latah County and Ada County, it is clear that this could easily be a back and forth scenario where at some points Latah County is higher and at other points Ada County is higher. And it almost looks like we may have recently been headed in that direction as recently as a few weeks ago. In looking at the survey numbers, Your Honor, I'd like to talk about what the numbers from the survey actually say. And I'd like to start by looking at Defense Exhibit F1, Dr. Dare. We don't dispute any of the testimony that she gave today. We don't dispute anything in her declaration. And one of the things in her declaration that she discussed was a 5% margin of error in surveys such as this, with 400 survey respondents in a population within the range of our population in Latah County and in the population of Ada County. So if we're talking about a 5% margin of error, according to the defendant's own expert, and we're looking at case exposure in Latah County of 98% and Ada County of 93%, those communities are within the margin of error. Looking at presumption of guilt among jurors who knew about the case, Latah County, 67%, Ada County, 68%, Canyon County, 69%, and Bannock County, 76%. Latah County, Ada County, and Canyon County are at best within the margin of error. And if these results are to be taken literally, Latah County has the lowest number of jurors who knew about the case who are going to presume Mr. Kohberger guilty. Now, when you zoom out and look at the survey results for presumption of guilt among all respondents, Latah County is at 66%, Ada County is at 64%, Bannock also at 64%, and Canyon at 62%. Again, you're within this margin of error here. I would also point the court to the fact that jurors among the total sample size who had no opinion about this case, potential jurors, survey respondents, Latah County had the highest number of folks who reported having no opinion about this case at 17%. Ada County, 12%, Canyon, 13%, and Bannock at 9%. And then again, jurors among the total sample who had no opinion about BRYAN Kohberger, Latah County, 29%, Ada County, 25%, Canyon County, 23%, and Bannock County, 24%. Again, we have the highest number of survey respondents in Latah County saying that they have no opinion about the defendant. When you zoom out, this is the big picture. These are the questions that matter. The question is, which community is the most likely to give Mr. Kohberger a fair trial? We can split hairs and say, well, if this person knows this media item, then they're X% more likely to think he's guilty. That's not the big picture. Those are trees in the forest, but we're ignoring the forest. And if you're looking at the forest is which community has the least amount of bias. And there are obviously some personal connections in Moscow and to the University of Idaho. The state does not dispute that. We believe those can be dealt with through other measures short of venue change. But when it comes to bias itself within a community, the court can take this entire 300+ page document of all of the survey responses and look at these surveys and see that this the pervasive media coverage across the entire state has simply created some complications and difficulties. Those are not unique to Lake County. The more productive conversation to have is how can we craft questionnaires that will ask jurors factual questions that help us identify sources of bias. For example, are you employed by the University of Idaho and how? Or did you know one of the victims? Things like that are factual that will allow us to then follow up and ask more questions. And frankly, Your Honor, the state would be willing, as we approach trial, to engage in good faith discussions with defense counsel and the court about potentially just excusing some jurors who are too factually close to the case for cause from the outset. We're willing to have that discussion. Another thing that the court can do that would address some of the concerns that were testified to regarding bias and social pressures is to allow potential jurors to have individual voir dire and outside the presence of other jurors and outside the presence of cameras or audio recording that are being live streamed. In this case, it's going to be critically important that potential jurors who come to jury duty feel like they can give honest answers and feel like they can be forthright. And in order to do that, I think individual voir dire would be very appropriate, and the court has that option available to it. I think another possibility that the court should consider, particularly after looking at Exhibit C and those line graphs where we're talking about peaks in media coverage, is sealing some potential hearings coming up. And the defense may not want to seal certain hearings for good reason. We're not asking the court at this point to seal all hearings going forward, but the state believes that there may be certain evidentiary hearings. For example, if the state files 404B notices or motions in limine related to the evidence, some of that information might be extremely prejudicial, and the state would agree to seal hearings where prejudicial information is going to come out in that hearing. And that too is a tool that the court has before it to alleviate some of those peaks in media coverage, because of course, part of the court's consideration is going to be the intensity of media coverage over the life of the case. And so one way that the court can address that is by sealing certain hearings, and the parties can use good faith and seal certain motions or briefs addressing prejudicial information temporarily until the trial is complete. When we're talking about bias and individuals who come to court for jury selection, I think it's important to remember that we have to deal with what the law says. And what the law says is that voir dire and jury selection is the appropriate process for ferreting out bias. We don't get to hand wave the jury instructions that are based in case law and that are handed to us by the Idaho Supreme Court. We don't get to hand wave those and refer to them as indoctrination and act like all potential jurors are going to come to court and lie, that they can't be trusted. Now, certainly there are some human biases, but a good voir dire is the tool to address those. And we don't get to just burn the system down. That's not what we're here to do. We have to use the voir dire process. I would also point out that when we're looking at, well, actually, Your Honor, let's talk about some numbers. Let's assume, we've heard a lot about the Daybell case. Let's assume that this court decides to summon 1,800 jurors. Let's assume that this court decides to seat a jury of 12 with 6 alternates, given that it's going to be a very long trial. If this court were to summons a jury of 1,800 jurors, which was the amount that was summoned in Ada County in Daybell, this court could just as easily summons 1,800 jurors in Latah County with a prospective jury pool of 32,000 as a court could summons 1,800 people in Ada County. It doesn't matter that Ada County's population is 16 times higher than the population in Latah County, because in Ada County, the court, if the court moves this trial to Ada County, is not going to say, well, we're in Ada County, I guess I'll summons in 20,000 jurors. That's not how it works. This court could just as easily summons in 1,800 jurors in either location. And if this court were to summons 1,800 jurors, only 1 in 100 1 in 100 would have to qualify to sit on a jury in order for this court to proceed to trial. So if you look at that 1,800 number and you look at some of the survey numbers, let's look at total prejudgment. Total prejudgment by total sample. 17% of Latah County jurors had no opinion on total prejudgment. That sounds low, but when you look at it out of a jury pool of 1,800, that's over 300 people walking into this courthouse with no opinion about the case. You look at the question, given what you have read, seen, or heard about this case, would Bryan Kohberger have a difficult time convincing you that he is not guilty of murder? 19% said no, 16% said no opinion. You add those up and you have over 600 jurors out of an 1,800 person jury pool who would answer that question in that way. What is your opinion of Bryan Kohberger? No opinion, 29%. That's over 500 jurors that would come into this courthouse with no opinion of Bryan Kohberger. A large jury pool is a solution to the media coverage in this case, and this court is going to have to summon a large jury pool wherever this court holds this trial, whether it's in Ada County, whether it's here, whether it's in Bannock County, or whether it's in Camden County. And frankly, Your Honor, as we move toward the issue of convenience, if anything, these survey numbers being so close to one another and so tight with each other should tell the court that if the court did determine that a venue change was appropriate, if the court made that determination, Kootenai County or Nez Perce County would be a far more logical choice, because those are geographically closer and the state would not have to pick up and move all of its evidence for 3 months down 300 miles to Boise. The court would now have to move its entire court staff. People could still go home. There would be less witness travel expenses. So if the court decides to change venue, the court should look at more convenient options closer to Latah County. Either Kootenai County or Nez Perce County would alleviate some of the concerns laid out by the defense about the connections to the university or the connections to Moscow itself. But again, even looking at the survey on those issues of connections to Moscow or connections to the university, 39% of folks in Latah County visited or walked by the home where the murders occurred. 60%, nearly 60% didn't. That means that out of a jury pool of 1,800, over 1,000 people would not have gone by the home where the murders occurred. Are you or a family member, student or employee at the University of Idaho in Moscow? 75% of folks in Latah County said no. That's 1,300 out of 1,800. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, Your Honor, but a large jury pool alleviates these concerns so much better than simply moving venue to another locale where the public sentiment is so close that it's within the margin of error, or if you're taking these survey results literally, worse. That makes no sense, Your Honor. The other option that the court has available to it would be to bring in a jury pool from Nez Perce. Again, the state does not believe that a venue change is warranted given the evidence that the court has before it. But if the court were persuaded that a Latah County jury could not successfully be sat in this case, the court could bring in jurors from Nez Perce County. Lewiston is approximately 30 minutes away. It would certainly be a longer drive for them, but the court could deal with that in scheduling and make those accommodations. It has many months to prepare to do that. Moving to the convenience issue, I think it's important to note that Latah County is not a tiny little community. Latah County might be close-knit, but it is not a tiny little community. Latah County is one of the top 25% of most populated counties in the state of Idaho. It's 11th out of 44 counties in Idaho. There are 32,000, according to Dr. Edelman, jury-eligible citizens in Latah County. It is not so tiny that we could not summons in a jury of 1,800, a jury pool of 1,800 folks. since the convenience argument focuses primarily on Ada County, that's what I'm going to address today. So starting with the size of courthouse and the ability to house parties and court staff. It's already built into the Latah County Courthouse for the court to have a place to go, for the court's employees to have a place to go, for court staff, for the court staff attorney. All of that is built into the Latah County Courthouse. Unlike moving to Ada County, where the courthouse would have to accommodate the court and all the court staff. Similarly, the prosecutor's office and their staff already built into the Latah County Courthouse. No separate accommodations would be needed. The defense will have to have accommodations wherever they go, and certainly they are entitled to privacy and accommodations that will allow them to prepare for this extensive trial. They absolutely should have that. But they are going to have to find those accommodations regardless of where this trial is located, unless it does get moved to Kootenai County. And so keeping this trial in Latah County would be a lesser burden on the Latah County Courthouse, in the sense that they would simply have to find accommodations for the defense team rather than finding accommodations for everyone. As to juror space and security, as well as the argument of overall security, it is true that the Ada County Courthouse has a precedent of handling large trials. And it is true that Ada County does a very good job with that. But the reason Ada County does a very good job with handling these high-profile cases with security, with court staff, with organization, with getting jurors in and out in an organized fashion, the reason Ada County does a good job with that isn't because Ada County has a physically bigger courthouse. It's because Ada County has diligent, competent, and professional staff. And I have every reason to believe that with the 9 months we have until trial, that this court staff here and security could also have the time to prepare and make operation plans and all of the things that go into having a trial of this magnitude. I have no doubt that they can accomplish that with careful planning and preparation over the many months between now and trial. It is also my understanding that there is a means to bring jurors securely into this courthouse outside of the public view. Moving on to the cost of travel expenses, council referenced the cost of transportation to and from the airport and correctly noted that the Spokane Airport is considerably further from the Latah County Courthouse than the Boise Airport is from the Ada County Courthouse. That's absolutely correct. However, the Lewiston Airport is a shorter drive, again, about 30 minutes, and does connect to some major airport hubs. That would be another option. But even taking into account that there may be some additional rental car expense for the few out-of-state witnesses that we're going to have, that would be negated and then some by transporting all of the local witnesses from Latah County down 300 miles to Boise, by paying for accommodations in Boise for the court and court staff, the prosecutor's office and prosecutor's office staff, and the many local witnesses that will be testifying in this trial. There's also a logistical issue of transporting evidence for a 3-month trial, the chain of custody issues, the evidence tech from the Moscow Police Department, and it's my understanding there's only one, taking him out of his role up in Moscow here for 3 months and having him in Boise, trying to manage this evidence in a location that we would also have to arrange for, and dealing with the chain of custody issues, transporting the evidence back and forth. I think the court can also consider, since this is a pretty broad standard on the convenience side of things, the effect of prosecutors and law enforcement being away from the community for up to 3 months. And I think the court should also consider the nature of Latah County itself. The infrastructure of Latah County, and specifically Moscow, which has a university of nearly 12,000 students, is that this community is tailor-made to expand and contract with the rhythm of the school year. So this isn't going to be a situation where there aren't enough hotels or aren't enough restaurants. This town, as well as neighboring Pullman, which provides additional accommodations, is designed to handle large influxes of people. That should not be any concern for the court at all. Again, we are not talking about a tiny community here. We are talking about a mid-sized town that's on the, frankly, a larger side, on the larger side for counties within this state, that can amply accommodate a jury trial of this magnitude, particularly in the summer months where you don't have these major academic events. Finally, since we are talking about the interests of justice in the convenience prong of the rule, it is completely appropriate for the court to also consider the fact that most of the victims' families, not all of them, but most of them, live closer to Latah County than they do to Boise. That means that for them, traveling to this trial, which they will have a constitutional right to attend, and again, we're only asking the court to consider this in the convenience prong, will be much easier for them and more convenient for them than it would be for them to have to travel hundreds of miles to Boise. I think the court can and should consider that factor as well. Your Honor, at the end of the day, these surveys have given the court a factual basis to deny this motion to change venue, and we hope that's what the court decides to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beatty. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you, Judge.
Your Honor, as I sat and listened to Ms. Beatty talking about all of the prejudicial coverage and how there's a problem in other counties as well as Latah County, it really struck me that everybody knows how prejudicial this media coverage is. Everybody knows that. And that's really the question the court has to answer today.
Oh no, what happened? What happened? Is mine the only stream out? Let me look on my phone. My gosh. It just went. No, it looks gone. They kicked us out. Nope. Hers is down too. Yep, the video is down. People are wondering if he cut it off. Yeah, we only heard one side of expert opinions. Like, I would think that if the prosecution would have other experts that would be like, well, no, those experts, they're not necessarily. Oh. What if we go over to Andrea? Oops.
Her only job is to get up there on the stand and say, yes, I have the expertise to evaluate if this was properly done. And in my opinion, it was properly done. But no, we went on this massive adventure.
Yeah.
So I can't really summarize her for you guys because honestly, it was chaos. It was chaos of terms and explanations and personal stories and anecdotes and how we would do it and how I assume they did it because of how we would do it. And it was quite crazy. And ultimately, I think it came down to she agrees that it was a good survey. I might have been lost in a lot of the detail. Yeah, I would have cut that witness off. While we're talking about how that person would do things versus how I would do them, I would have cut that witness off long before. Not trying to be impolite. Thank you so much for offering that. But let me just refocus you on. So we got the argument. It is a low standard. The reasonable likelihood standard is low. And yeah, I think one of the strongest point Ann Taylor makes is that it does not take an expert to look at the media and understand how prejudicial it's been for Bryan Kohberger. Of course, it has been prejudicial. It has reported nothing but the negative. It has been just shockingly unreliable with the information that it has reported. They've had to specifically address in the court some of the things that were reported that are false. And that's just a few, because those are just the few items that Mr. Edelman chose to talk about in that survey. But we know there's been other stuff, because we heard about that back in that whole conflict situation that I was talking about before we came back up from court today. When it came out, the argument had been Ann Taylor represented Kara Kernodle, dropped her flat so that she could represent Bryan Kohberger instead. Why? Because she's going to make all kinds of money off of doing that. That was literally an argument that people were out there making based on false information. They had a whole chambers conference about it. There's a minute order that's in the record about that. Basically what happened, and everybody's kind of acknowledging, yeah, a lot of this information out there, it is completely false. And frankly, if you follow Sleuthy Goosey, which you should, if you're on X, which you shouldn't be, honestly, you really shouldn't be. It's such a terrible place. But there are little spots of light in all of it. And Sleuthy Goosey is one of them, because she just does an amazing job with compiling information, archiving it, organizing it, really top notch in that sphere. But Sleuthy Goosey went out and got all files. Yeah, she went and got Kara Kernodle's files, and so you could look at them and see who's representing her, and it's not Ann Taylor. Like, that's all it would have taken for the media to vet that. Just go check, go look at the file. And could a single person be bothered to do that? No, they couldn't, because it made for a much more dramatic story to get an active, a very troubled woman, okay, somebody who is struggling with active addiction, obviously on the run from the law, giving an interview about just how bad she felt to have been let down by her lawyer like this, and none of it was true. Not a single word of it was true. That's the kind of thing that the media has been doing, and we all know that. And so you don't have to read the tea leaves to understand what that means for Bryan Kohberger. I loved what didn't get reported about Bryan. Just a small little selection. What didn't get reported by Bryan: he is loved by his family. How many times have you seen out there his family's ditched him? His family thinks he's guilty. His family thinks he did it. His family hasn't shown up for him in court. His family hasn't visited him in jail. Is any of that true? How the hell would you know? How would anybody know? Ann Taylor, I would think she would know. And he's loved by his family. He's got good grades. He's got a dog he loves. My only complaint about this one is I can already hear, yeah, and Hitler loved puppies. I can already hear it. It's coming. Watch this space. It'll be out there. To me, I hear doggy loves, not guilty. That's it. Not guilty. He's a dog lover. That's all I need to hear. No, I'm just kidding, guys, of course. Buffalo Bill, right? Buffalo Bill in the Silence of the Lambs. He was a dog lover too. I mean, yes, the coverage is not going to stop. It is going to pop back up in the hearings. It does make sense to move it to Ada, the largest population, the most experienced with this kind of thing. No, of course it's not convenient. It's not convenient to move it anywhere. So then we got the state's response, and boy, did I take some issue with it. Boy, did I take some issue with it.
Here we go, Erica. We took issue
I never
with it
like
too.
when a lawyer chooses not to ask experts questions about things like, for example, your margin of error and the significance of that, but then wants to make an argument about it, you should have vetted that with the expert. You're not the expert. I don't have any reason to think that you know what you're talking about or that your representation about what that means is accurate. But that was a significant part of her argument. Well, all these things, the counties are all the same. That's basically her argument. The counties are all the same. Everywhere is as bad as Latah. And in fact, Latah is better than other places because they had the highest percentage of people who reported no opinion. Well, the question has to be, how credible is that? One of the standards that was pointed out in the defense memorandum is it so pervasive and so prejudicial? Are so many people affected by this publicity that you can or should reasonably doubt the disavowals of the other people in the veneer? They have no opinion, or is that the socially acceptable answer that they know that they're supposed to give? And so that's what they gave. And so they want to focus on mitigation, jury questionnaires, how to structure it. Maybe you stipulate to excluding people. Maybe we think real hard about solving the problem that Bryan Edelman said is unsolvable. There's no way to get past this problem, that if you stick with open-ended questions about what people know, they don't volunteer anywhere near everything that they know. When they did that in the survey, they got 1 item, but people recognized close to 5. You're not going to get good information about what they know. Sealing some hearings. This is the state's remedy. This is still the state's remedy. Isn't this? It's just so ironic. Isn't it ironic that now we've reached the point in the case where we have a pretty good reason to think the evidence is unraveling. The case is unraveling. This is not beneficial for the state. Now is when they don't want us to hear it. We got 100 and some pages, almost 150 pages of press releases back during that investigation. But now we shouldn't hear it. I think that's going to be a problem. She very specifically did not call out motions to suppress as hearings that should be closed. To me, obviously the reason why she didn't do that is because there is case law directly on that says you cannot do that. The public has the right to attend, specifically motions to suppress. But it talks about evidentiary hearings in general, pretrial motions in general. So you can't seal a motion to suppress. Well, what's the level of interest in that going to be, do you think? Motion to suppress? It's going to be massive. It's going to be massive. And somehow you're going to mitigate that by sealing a motion in limine? Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I am not convinced. Me
neither.
Sealing motions in limine is constitutionally sound. We, the public, have the right to know what our courts are doing, to understand the decisions that they're making, and why the process is unfolding the way that it is. And so if evidence is not
100%.
going to be allowed to be presented, we are entitled to know that, and we are entitled to know why and the reasoning for it. This is our process. If it's not fair, we need to know. Sealing is their answer. Oh my God, my stomach turned. I knew they were. I knew it.
Andrea, it's
Really
so
good.
great. Yeah.
Jury selection is the time to deal with it, the state says. And, I can really see Judge going that way. I can. He didn't actually take notes right then. But he did. He did. And their answer, their solution is, well, just call a really big panel.
Yeah.
Just call a really big panel. Well, you know, we talked about the math problem already over the break. And so the problem is you can call 1,800 in Latah County, and 98% of them already have knowledge of the case. Let's do the math. 1,800, 98% is 1,764 of them. 36 people, 36 blank slates in that veneer of 1,800. That's it. If you call the same 1,800 people in Ada County, well, only, oh wait, hang on, I did the math wrong. Let me do it again. Okay, 1,800 times 98%.
Oh yeah, that's definitely one of the worries.
64. So yes, that is 36 people. Yep. 36 people. 1,800 people, 93%. Why is my computer? It's giving me the same number. My calculator. That is bizarre. That's not correct. Oh no, it's more. It's 126 people that you get in Latah County. You get almost, or in Ada County, you get almost 4 times as many people who are blank slates in Ada County in that 1,800 person veneer than you do in Latah. That's the math. That's why. That's the difference between those 1,800 people that you call. So 1 in 100 would have to qualify. 1%.
That's it.
1% is pretty close. It's like you're pretty close. There's only 2% that haven't heard of the case at all.
Whoa.
In Latah County.
There's
only 2% of them.
Say.
So you're getting people with case knowledge. You're accepting at the outset that you're getting people on the jury that know something about the case, and knowing that knowledge about the case correlates with prejudgment of the case. That's what you're accepting. And for all that the state is arguing, well, we should be focusing on ways to mitigate that, they didn't present any evidence of how that can be done. The defense expert here has pointed out there is no way to mitigate that during jury selection because you can't ask them what they saw. You already know they're going to underdisclose what they're exposed to, and they're going to underestimate their own bias. They're going to overestimate their ability,
right, to
be fair and impartial. That's what the state accepts, which, you know, maybe surprises people. No, that's not a surprise. Of course, that's okay with the state. Of course, that's okay. So the state went through a pretty long part of their argument trying to, you know, say that these things are equivalent, but it seems pretty clearly it's not. Pretty clearly it's not. So then the convenience argument. Well, if you're going to move it anywhere, move it to Kootenai or Nez Perce or bring in jurors from there. Once again, have the opportunity to present information, present evidence to the court about, is that
100.
feasible? Would that fix the problem? Is that in fact a solution? We don't know. I mean, we heard from the defense expert why Lewiston's probably not a whole lot better than Moscow. It's not very far. It's what, 40-minute drive? Like, it's right there, you know? It's one of the closest places, you know, city-wise to get to from Moscow. And yeah, I made a little side comment during the argument. Of course, that's what they want. That's going to be a hanging jury. This is just my perspective, my familiarity with this area. Yeah, that will be a hanging jury. That's why they want Kootenai County. That's the argument that's going on in the background that isn't being made explicitly, but is implicit. there's going to be more people in Boise that are against the death penalty or that are just going to be reluctant to impose it. Lewiston, you're going to have more people that are in favor of the death penalty. It's just reality. So naturally, they are pushing for Kootenai County.
Oh, the state?
So the rebuttal,
Or both of them?
I didn't love the rebuttal. I really didn't. Focus on Latah County, not the other counties. Well, that would be nice. But he doesn't necessarily have to do that. And it's a really easy out. It's one of the easiest outs he has, really. It's bad everywhere. We're going to have to mitigate no matter where we go. So we might as well keep it here because the community does own the case. And it's more convenient for the witnesses, the evidence, the logistics, etc. And we'll just call on the veneer here and we'll do the best we can. If we can't, it turns out we have to move it, then we'll deal with it then. It's just the easiest out for him.
Sadly, it's true.
No guarantee that this is a remedy to be able to move it to one of these other counties, because the press coverage has just been so bad and so pervasive that everywhere is tainted. Everywhere is tainted. It's nice of him to say it's the most difficult decision he's ever had to make. I don't know that I necessarily believe that. Perhaps he, sincerely does feel that and think that. But no, my impression is that he's certainly already leaning one way. If he hasn't, just in generally already decided it. And the reason why he's cutting himself off from staying more is because he doesn't want to give away his thought process at this point in time. But really, his opinion writing is just going to be a process of going back and justifying the outcome that he's already reached. I'd like to be wrong.
Oh.
I just, don't think I am.
Yeah.
But I could be. And so now we wait. We're still waiting on decision on the motion to compel too. Pretty sure.
Yeah,
unless something came down through back channels and we're not getting a written one on that. But still waiting on. That was there for a while. It's been back there since May.
I guess we're not getting streamed back.
Maybe they mooted it. Maybe they worked it out. I don't know. But it's under advisement, and we'll get the ruling when we get it. We'll get it in writing. Kind of knew that's what was going to happen. For all the reasons we talked about on the break, this is, going to come up on appeal. May not be the strongest issue on appeal. Probably won't be the weakest issue on appeal.
I'm going to link her account.
He's going to make sure that he gets it
so
right.
So that anybody who wants to can go watch the break.
Well, that was kind of a long one.
I would
today,
really like
guys.
to watch her.
A little bit of a marathon session. I wasn't necessarily sure what we were going to get, but it's been a little bit since we put in that kind of shift. So
I'll put it in
I
the
do want
chat
to thank
for now.
everybody who hung out
And
during
then
this.
I will add it
this
after
rather extended.
after this slide
today.
into the comments.
Thank you for hanging with me and following this through to the bitter end. Yeah, boy, I gotta say, it's the kind of hearing that leaves me so disheartened. There's just so much misinformation out there. And it's just so tragic. It really is. I got to get around. I've been saying this for so long. I got to get around to doing my comparison of the PC affidavits between this case and the Long Island serial killer, alleged Rex Heuermann. Just because we still have so many people who think, oh, this PC affidavit, it's so strong. There's so much to it. No, I need you to see what a strong probable cause affidavit looks like. I need you to see what a circumstantial case with corroboration upon corroboration upon corroboration everything corresponding, you need to see what that looks like and then compare that to what we're working with here. Maybe it will make it worse because it will, like me, maybe you will be even then more disheartened about everything we've learned about the bias here and the prejudgment. But maybe not. This is it's a heinous crime. It's a heinous crime. And whoever was arrested with it, arrested and charged with it, was going to draw that ire, that judgment, that anger, all of it. So we have just a couple of comments to go here.
All right, I'm gonna pause. So, yes, her link is in the chat. I'll put it in the comments. Andrea Burkhart, she is a defense attorney in Washington, but she's very close to that area. And she's, if you don't know, she has been to a few of these hearings for BRYAN Kohberger in Moscow. She has been covering this case since the beginning. Her insights are absolutely great. I highly recommend her if you haven't seen her. So I guess I'm not surprised that they didn't come back on after they lost connection. But I think Andrea's right. I mean, we haven't known. We've always Chic Bait. Hello and welcome. Good to see you. I always had a kind of, I don't know, not a gut feeling, but kind of like in the back of my mind that Judge probably won't change the venue, but I was hoping he would. Good to see you. And it's amazing because, like, I thought when the state and the defense can't agree on something, that's when they go and have a motion and they present their argument to the court, and so that the judge can help make a decision of, you know, one way or the other, since the two sides can't agree. Every time, we haven't really seen the state put up a fight. They've just been kind of I feel like they've been cherry picking, and they're just saying just all the negatives that you can pick out that aren't necessarily true, maybe a little bit misleading from the defense's case. But I thought the judge was supposed to rule in favor of whoever had the better argument. And every time the defense has had amazing arguments, and they brought experts. The state has never done that. Right? The state is ignoring 4 experts. Like, so a lot of these decisions I feel like should have gone to the defense by default because the state didn't put up a fight, or they're putting up a misleading one. I don't know. I'm probably wrong about that. So it was only one day. I know there were some people out there saying that this change of venue hearing could have gone on for a day or two. And I said, well, maybe it'll go on for tomorrow as well. But probably not. They probably just stopped. You know, Aunt Taylor can be agreeable sometimes, and she's probably like, yeah, we don't need to put it back on YouTube. I want to thank everybody for watching today. I mainly wanted to record it because, you know, I have those shorts on my channel where I highlight the different things that the experts said so that we all get a better understanding of what they meant. And I didn't expect anybody to come watch. I just wanted to make sure that, I have access to the footage. So I'm very thankful that if you came and watched today, or if you're here now, thank you so much for being here now. And thank you, everybody. I have 100 subscribers today. Oh my gosh. You all have been absolutely amazing. Like I said, I didn't expect anyone to come here today, and you guys you made my day. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Erica. Yeah. And anytime you're here, Sheepy, that's always amazing. Always. So glad you're back from vacation. We missed you for that week you were gone. We all need those. Yes, they're just as important, maybe sometimes more important. Yeah. I just don't know what to say about this whole hearing today. I'm very disappointed in it. I feel like we're going to be disappointed in Judge. I mean, it's absolutely clear to me that Latah County, this case should not be there when these jurors are going to feel pressured for a guilty verdict. And it also says something about the state's argument that they don't feel confident enough that they can't win fairly somewhere else, that they have to rely on a bias verdict to get a guilty verdict. And I am so interested to hear what Andrea has to say about appeal. I can only imagine is that, for one, it's going to get an automatic appeal. And two, if it's absolutely clear, which I think it will be, that this trial could have been moved for a more fair trial, I think that's going to put, more fuel to their appeal. But I guess the people who are out there who are, I guess we call them guilters, they should want it in a different jurisdiction as well, because if this does go to appeal, which it will, he's going to have a stronger argument. So it's counterintuitive for these pro-guilters to be like, oh, there's media coverage everywhere. So, what happened to let's do this one time and let's do it right, or the correct way. You're right. He should be exonerated. And, you bring up a great point, Erica, because on appeal, there's no juries. I think that you're just going in front of judges. And so the judges should be a lot less biased, and they should know the law a little bit more than the average person. So that they should know the chain of custody is probably non-existent for that DNA or the sheath, that the cell phone data is non-existent, and there is probably there are misleading statements, because you can't create a scientific hypothesis, which is what Brett Payne is doing in the PCA when he says this is the route this car took. It's a scientific hypothesis. You have to use quality ingredients. You have to use accurate documentation, or else your whole experiment, the scientific method, if you have to throw it out and start again. And so it's physically impossible for him to have come to those conclusions that he came to in the PCA when he doesn't use the required information it needs to make the measurements, like the car measurements, the drive testing, all of the things. And so it boggles my mind that there's people there that don't understand that science requires data. And Brett Payne did not use data. Oh, hello, Cassidy Kane. Welcome. Oh, it's so good to see you. Well, yeah, the IgG as well. I think the IgG is very fishy. I don't even think it's BRYAN's DNA. Right, and there is questions about the chain of custody with the IgG, because in the state's motion for the protective order of the IgG, they kind of highlight a chain of custody for that IgG, because they were saying the Idaho State Lab, they had the sheath, they tested it, they initially didn't find DNA, but then they did. They found a partial, they put it in CODIS, there were no matches at CODIS. So that's when they gave it to Ortham Labs. And Ortham Labs, they developed only a partial tree, which means that's not one person. And when you have a partial tree, it can be difficult to narrow it down to one branch. Or maybe they did just do one branch. But even if you do one branch, that is a whole mess of people. You could go back 10 generations or 100 generations. It depends how partial the tree it is that they made. And then from there, the Ortham Labs just stopped everything. They just dropped everything. And then Bill Thompson made it seem like the FBI swooped in and they took over all of the IgG information. And then that's when the tip that put law enforcement in the direction of Bryan Kohberger. Now, if any part of that is not documented, or any part of that is not quite how it went, that whole thing puts into question the DNA profile that they claim to have matched from the buccal swab from after Bryan Kohberger's arrest. So these people who are saying that, oh, the IgG doesn't matter because they're just going to use the buccal swab because it matched the DNA. Well, no, it is kind of connected to that. And even though the state claims that they're not going to use the IgG, they're only going to use the buccal swab profile, that's only a claim made by the state. We don't know about the chain of custody. Ann Taylor does. I have a feeling Ann Taylor's going to put in a motion to suppress about that. So the state may not even be able to use the DNA data, or there could be, we don't even know if they're going to be allowed to use it. So just because the state claims they're going to do something doesn't necessarily mean that they actually are going to do it. Oh, thank you, Cassidy Kane. Do you mean the direct comparison between STRs and STRs versus SNPs and SNPs, or SNPs and SNPs? Right, because the FBI, they did not do a direct comparison between the SNP profile from the sheath or the crime scene I wonder if, let me bring up that paper, because I just had Is this it? This is it. All right. I want to share my screen again. Right. So they never compared the SNP to BRYAN at all. So I don't know how they got an STR and matched it after that, because you can't. The ISP doesn't directly. They don't compare SNPs to STRs, and the FBI didn't compare the crime scene SNP to BRYAN's SNP. So where's the comparison? Where are these actual results? Because here it is. Okay. You're right. They didn't do a direct comparison because they don't have an answer right here where it says STR profile is more likely to be seen if. That's not a comparison. That is not a result from a comparison. All that says is, well, there might be an STR DNA profile, but no, there's going to be an STR profile no matter if the defendant matches us or not, right? Like, do they actually have this STR profile? Because this is not proper English or proper science to say a DNA STR profile will be visible or seen if it is a match to another person. That's not how it works. There's usually a number or a statistic associated with the likelihood of being seen, not an entire profile. And I also wanted to look up one more thing where they were talking about the FBI not comparing the SNP. Yeah. And if you notice, let me start over up here. They did the same thing here where they talk about the actual physical action of what an STR analysis is. In general, in science, an STR DNA analysis involves looking at 20 regions within human DNA and allows law enforcement to make a direct comparison between two STR DNA profiles. That says nothing about Brian Kohberger. That just says in science, that's what an STR profile is. Now, it does say once law enforcement had a single cell DNA profile, single source DNA profile from the K-bar knife, but it doesn't have, this paragraph has nothing to do with BRYAN in here. So this is another thing where even in your opening statement, even in your probable cause affidavit, you are not giving us that the DNA is BRYAN's at all. And that needs to go in your chain of custody. And I thought it was very strange how the attorney today mentioned chain of custody. I don't know, it's weird. So, right, so no DNA match was found, but they never actually, you're right, Cassidy Kane, they didn't compare. I don't know. Well, I guess this is. How would they have known it's BRYAN's DNA before they arrest him? Is that the whole thing with this? When they didn't even. It's very weird. So let me see. I was looking at the FBI did not. So this also down here says, to the state's knowledge, the state doesn't know what the FBI did. So they're just like, well, they could have, made some notes, but they may have jotted. They don't know because they didn't see the work. That's a little sketchy as well. Yeah, so they never. That paragraph didn't say that they matched Brian's father or Bryan. They just explained what an STR profile is. And I know you're saying that they won't use it, but we don't know yet. Ann Taylor might have that in there. That's just whatever. Like, sometimes the state says things and people are like, they think it's set in stone. But it is shady. You're so right. So, see, right here at the bottom, right before it says argument, the state has not seen or possessed. So how did the FBI give them a tip if the state has no idea what the tip did, what the FBI did? I just don't understand. All right, here it is. This is what I wanted to talk about. The FBI did not conduct a direct comparison between the SNP profile from the K-bar knife sheath and the defendant's SNP profile. Well, no, we know. It doesn't say they did it to his father's either. Yeah, hopefully Becca Barlow can tear this apart, because nowhere in this document or the PCA does it say that they matched any DNA. It's kind of like, it's exactly, how the state in their most recent document was like, well, we didn't say Bryan stalked anyone. We said he was in proximity to a cell tower. That's a huge difference. And I feel like the same thing is going on here with this DNA stuff. They never actually said it matched to anything. I mean, they don't have the scientific data behind it to say it. So not having the data to prove the cell phone data, because Brett didn't have the information he needed, he said it anyway. Same thing with this DNA stuff. They don't have any of the data that supports the matching of the DNA, but they're still saying it. There's a theme there. And I'm not sure how else to say it, but they are stating things without any support. And here it does say the comparison indicated the DNA found on the trash belonged to the biological father of the individual who left the DNA on the K-bar knife sheath. That's fine. That's their hypothesis. That's their theory. They can have that, but they have to have the data behind it to support that statement, and none of that is in here. However, they did cleverly put the word statistical down here. But then you go into this again, where they're saying the statistical match. Well, the statistical match was an STR profile is likely to be seen if the defendant is the source. That is so misleading. Does that make sense that the STR profile is going to be visible no matter what? Because it's a physical thing. It's somebody's physical DNA. So that's going to be visible no matter if it matches, no matter if it's incomplete, no matter what state it's in. It's still a physical thing that they claim that they took from the crime scene. But what this is saying is that they don't have the physical item, the physical profile, because the profile apparently can only be seen if the defendant is the source. That's so weird. It's so more of that like word salad. It does seem like a faulty arrest warrant because it's like, it sounds pretty good when you skim over it, but then once you start reading it, you're like, wait, that doesn't really make sense. So saying that they're not going to use the IgG, they only want to use the DNA, that's a little bold because we don't know if it's actually going to be admissible, because to me, these documents say they don't have the chain of custody. That's what I'm getting out of it, because they wouldn't need to word it like that. It would be more straightforward and clear if they did have the chain of custody, or if they did actually have these biological samples, which you rightly pointed out, Cassidy Kane, they don't have it anymore. So they can't, nobody can look at what they did. They can't reproduce, because for one, they got the wrong person's DNA. And two, the source DNA from the crime scene is apparently trace DNA, which is skin cells. So they didn't even get a full profile on that. So, yeah. And if you want to see more about the questions about chain of custody, Yollie Yo-Law is a great channel. I know I've linked hers before, but she also goes into some discussion about chain of custody and the way that they've worded things. I think she picked out a few other things than I picked out, because there's plenty of them here. But, you just follow her example of how she went through, and she was saying, chain of custody is going to be an issue for this statement. And then you can follow that kind of outline, and then it's easy to go in and pick out, just like I did. Yeah, she is excellent. I'm gonna find her link too, because she's great. Oh, I don't know where do I? Oh, here we go. I'm still learning how to use Twitter and YouTube like on my computer, because I just use it on my phone all the time. Oh, Ink Masquerade, hello and welcome. Oh, you watched Yollie, Cassidy Kane? Yeah. She was on Andrew Myers a lot. Where is her thing? Oh, here we go. Oh, maybe I just have to type it in. Yollie Yo-Law. Nope, That didn't work. Anyway, I can't be on here too much. Like, oh, get what? What, Ink Masquerade? What? Oh, I'm so happy you made a YouTube channel. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Where's your link? Here. Let me see. I don't know how to. Do you guys know what these stars mean? I'm so proud of you, Ink Masquerade. Yeah, send it to me and I'll post it. Oh, I'm so proud of you. Oh, you're gonna have so much fun with it. You know, it's the journey. Yeah, I'll watch too. It's the journey, you know, it's not really the destination. You know, you'll grow so much as a person and you'll be surprised about the things that you can do. It's just all around great thing. I'm so happy for you. Now, I starred you, Erica. I starred you, Ink Masquerade, and Cassidy Kane. I don't know. Oh, no, that doesn't. That doesn't make you a mod. I don't know how to do it. But if you guys were a mod, you could put links in the chat. But I don't know how to do it. Right. I think that a lot more people are talking about the DNA now and how they're questioning it, which is great. And so that's going to help tip the scales. But yeah, we need to continue. Oh, well, I'll make you a mod, Cassidy Kane. I'll make all of you one. I just I don't know how to do it. Maybe I have to go into my channel. Oh. Oh, you were able to put it in chat. Great. Okay, well, I put it there for now. So do you have a theme? Did you do a video yet? Oh, I think I found it. . Okay. Are you blue yet? Ah, you're blue, Ink Masquerade. Oh, Erica, you're blue. All right, Cassidy Kane. Say something so we can see if you're blue. There you are. Wow, great. All right. Okay, now, Ink Masquerade, can you please copy and paste your full link? Oh, I'm very excited for you, Ink Masquerade, and anyone else. You know, if you're thinking about you're purple too. Okay, Erica's purple. Yeah, that's fun. Yay! I can see that you're blue too. Oh, you know what? Oh, you know? Oh, let me see. Huh. I don't see a link. Let me see. Oh, okay. I got it. Okay, is it going to let me copy it? Yes. Here we go. So everybody, this is the link to Ink Masquerade's channel. Yeah, let me give you a subscribe. Is this the channel? Or did you make a different one? Oh, okay. Anyway, well, I'm so proud of you. Congratulations. You're going to have a good time on it. Okay, here is Yollie's. And then I'll put Andrea's in there. And then I am only going to stay on maybe for about 5 more minutes. Gosh, I'm so happy you guys came. I didn't really expect anyone to come today. Thank you so much. Here we go. There. So I know that Kathy Commercial Zone is a Twitter favorite, and I think that she's live right now with Excited Utterance. So I'm gonna get off here, and then I want to go see them there. I was gonna see if I can get their link. I just saw, oh, here it is. Here it is. All right, everybody. This is where Kathy Commercial Zone, Twitter's favorite. She's with Excited Utterance. So thank you again for coming. I'm going to get off here. I'm going to hop in there. And I hope to see you all there. Good luck with your channel, Ink Masquerade. I want to hear about an update the next time I see you. Okay? You all have a great night. And I'll be on Twitter. I'll be on YouTube. You know where to find me. I'll see you over at Excited Utterance to see commercials there. Bye, everybody.